AFTERMARTH. Alright kiddo, just stay still. You can return to look around my gizmos once I've finished treating your wounds. Pan said to Skuld as she put a band-aid in the middle of the forehead of the child goddess. After returning back to the Shinpaku Alliance headquarters, Pan proceeded to heal the wounds of every single one of the fighters, both old and new, under her employ. Finalizing with the goddesses themselves that had come along, as there were still matters that needed to be discussed between them and explanations to be made, but those could wait after she finished treating the wounds of her minions. Certainly the last batch of fights, although highly entertaining, had clearly put a dent on her medical supplies that she would need to replace soon. The little girl being treated simply stared with an irritated pout. She actually was trying to glare, but the way Skuld's face scrounged up made her look really cute rather than threatening. Though the reason for Skuld's enmity towards the alien girl wasn't because she was still incensed at her for having attacking her and her sisters, though there was still some grudge about it at the back of her mind, the main reason for her irritation was that Pan Ministrations took her away from her perusal of all of the inventions that the alien girl had left sprawled about through the workshop she had installed inside the Shinpaku Alliance headquarters. Being the little engineering nutjob she is, Skuld couldn't help but be interested in the inventions and technology brought by the Saiyan team, so the first thing she did when the group arrived in the Shinpaku HQ was to go over the machines and creations made by Pan and tinker with them to see how they worked. It was a testament to her genius that so far she hadn't caused any of the alien girl's inventions to explode, despite the fact she was clearly messing around with them and in some cases dismantling them and taking them apart to study their inner functioning. Pan obviously took notice of what the child goddess was doing, but decided not to comment on it since she was more focused in tending the wounds of her followers and the newest acquisitions to their ranks, that and the fact that it was pretty clear that Skuld knew what she was doing, so she didn't saw nothing bad in allowing the little goddess to sat her curiosity. However, now that she had the opportunity to speak with the little goddess, well, not so little since both girls were roughly the same size despite the fact that Pan was older, she commented. You're going to put that thing back the way you found it. I'm not going to have all my hard work going to waste because you forgot to tighten a bolt when you were reassembling my stuff back after you were messing with it. Pan said, as she looked at the prototype cold fusion reactor that she had been working on and that was currently broken apart in several pieces behind the child goddess. I know that. I'm not some rookie who doesn't even know how to hold a wrench. It will be good as new by the time I'm done working in it. You'll see. Skuld huffed a little, insulted at Pan for putting her skills in doubt. Pan didn't immediately reply and simply finished with her ministrations and began to put back the medical supplies inside their first aid kit. Good. As long as we see eye to eye with each other on this issue, there will be no trouble between us. This was just a friendly warning, that's all, she said as she finalized putting away her things and turned around to walk away. The child goddess was thoughtful for a moment before she called back at the alien girl before she was out of hearing range. Hey, nice workshop you have in here. All these advanced inventions of yours are pretty neat, she said grudgingly with a little embarrassment. It wasn't like she was having a change of heart about the alien girl, she still hadn't forgave her for attacking and knocking her out, but the youngest of the Norns could certainly held a modicum of respect towards a fellow inventor. Pan simply turned her head to look behind over her shoulder with a grin. Thanks, but it's nothing to be that impressed about. After all, most of these things are pretty common where I come from, but then again, this is alien tech way more advanced than what you can find on this primitive planet at the moment, she said, trailing off a little at the last part. Anyway, since you seem pretty interested in my stuff, how about if I make you my assistant and you can lend me a hand in whatever project I start working on? You seem competent enough, and it would give you the opportunity to see how my technology works up close, said Pan diplomatically, knowing she needed to mend a few bridges and thinking it could be pretty useful if she were to have some kind of backing from a few of the gods that run things around this planet. After all, she was pretty well aware of the kind of pull her grandfather had with the gods of the universe and the afterlife and knew very well how useful that kind of influence could be. But she was also truthful about the fact of needing an assistant. It would be nice to have someone that could understand her and keep up with her when she had the need of talking about advanced science and engineering, and the child goddess fitted that criteria perfectly. She seemed pretty smart and able despite her young age, but Pan wasn't put off by that in the least, since she was already building and creating advanced machines from a tender age thanks to the guidance of her parents and Aunt Bulma. The little girl was totally caught by surprise by that offer, her eyes sparkling with a hopeful shine. Really? You mean it? But recomposed herself quickly, remembering who she was speaking with. I mean, sure, whatever. I have no problem in lending you a hand if that is what you want, Skuld said, trying to downplay her interest and act as if she didn't care much about the alien girl's offer. Obviously, it was pretty easy to see through her, so Pan simply smirked in amusement. Alright, then it is settled then. Just come around whenever you feel like it in the afternoons, since that is when I'm usually busy working on one of my inventions, and we'll see where to put you to make the most of your skills. The teen Saiyan said nonchalantly before walking away from the child goddess to check over her followers one last time to see if there was still someone in need of healing. Due to the great quantity of people in need of medical attention, Pan had no choice but to prop them over the walls of the Shinpaku Alliance HQ. All of the fighters lined up sitting on the floor with their backs on the wall or simply lying on the cold floor due to lack of space. It looked like a scene out from one of those pictures of overcrowded medic field camps during World War I and II or the American Civil War. But none of the fighters present was complaining due to the effectiveness of the advanced medical procedures of the alien girl that quickly and expeditiously took care of closing up their wounds and fixing the damage done to them, so they were simply there lying on their spots calmly to allow their bandaged-up bodies to rest. Those who only had required a minimum of medical assistance, or none at all, were simply waiting on their own corners for something to happen. Some of the fighters turned to look at Pan as she made her rounds trying to find someone she may have missed. Well, I guess that is all. Everybody seems to have been taken care of already. Very well, time to speak to those goddesses and get some answers, she declared before moving towards the location where the other two Norns and Keiichi were resting. Erd having been the one injured enough to receive some medical attention as she had received several punches from the alien girl plus a blast to the chest that required a big gauze to be placed upon her scalded skin, the rest of the injuries being rather minor as it only required for her head to be bandaged around her temple and a band-aid to be placed on her cheek to cover a small scratch. The white-haired goddess of the past simply remained sitting on her spot with all the patience she could muster as she simmered down. She was still holding a grudge over the alien girl's action toward her and her sisters, but she did appreciate that Pan had been decent enough to take care of the wounds that she had inflicted upon her in the first place, so the least she could do was to try to keep things civil enough between them as thanks. That and because she was sure Belldandy would certainly not look at her with kind eyes if she started to stir up trouble inside this place full of injured people. Here too, alongside the elder Norns and the young mechanic, was the unconscious form of Lind resting with her back upon the wall. The young commander of the Valkyries was one of the people that had required a great deal of medical intervention as she had been left quite messed up after her fight with Pan. Her entire upper body, neck and head were covered totally in bandages, one of her arms in a sling and her left eye covered with a gauze before being bandaged too. Despite her injured condition, the blue-haired goddess looked quite at peace as she simply slept contentedly with a smile, her little angels floating about standing guard at her sides. Pan simply approached the little heavenly group with an unconcerned step. I think we need to have a little talk, was all she said as she stood over Belldandy. The brunette goddess simply nodded before standing up from the spot where she had been resting at Keiichi's side, as she had been in need of a moment to catch her breath after she sapped most of her magical reserves by using her healing spells to help cure the fighters that were most in need of urgent medical attention. Her little show of magic marveling and enrapturing most of the congregated martial artists, for in order to Belldandy to use her healing magic, she needed to sing in duet with her angel in order to chant her magical spells. The small concert of both divine voices was simply too gorgeous for the ears of mortals to take, leaving them in a daze as they heard such outworldly loveliness. Yes, I believe you must have many questions in need of answers, the kind goddess said as she faced the alien girl with a collected calm worthy of her status of goddess. The fighters and martial artists lying about around the two women suddenly grew completely quiet and began to strain their ears to hear the conversation between the two, curious about what they may talk. It was in that moment when Pan was about to make her fist question, that Lind finally stirred and woke up. My head, what happened? Is the fight over? The blue-haired goddess inquired groggily through her half-dulled senses as she tried to discern her surroundings. Well, look who decided to rejoin us in the land of the living. Pan said, unable to hold a smile. Like her father and grandfather, the Saiyan girl inherited their tendency of warming up towards opponents who had given them a good fight, and that lifted her opinion of Lin to the rank of friend. You know, that odd quirk that some fighters have where defeat means friendship must be a result of their primal social behavior as consequence of a semi-isolated lifestyle due to their predilection of spending most of their days training or honing their combat styles. As it is, the alien girl simply approached the injured blue-haired goddess with great care. So, how do you feel? Lin seemed a little out of sorts for a moment before getting out of her funk as she focused in the Saiyan teen at hearing the sound of her voice. She then felt all of her memories of her fight with Pan coming back to her in an instant. I lost, didn't I? She said with a sigh. It was a rhetoric question, since she already knew the answer. Pan just nodded, still beaming a smile. Yup, but don't worry about it. You did well, it was a great fight. I really enjoyed it very much. It was exactly what I needed to lift up my spirits. Just when I had resigned myself to never found a worthy opponent during my stay on this planet, you appeared and gave me one hell of a time. It was fun, but now playtime is over and we have to fix the mess we left behind. But first, we must tend to your injuries and make sure you recover. So tell me, how are you feeling? She asked again, trying to be as gentle as she could with the woman she was now beginning to consider a friend. Lin just blinked, musing over the words she had just heard before giving her answer. I'm alright, my body just feels a little stiff and it hurts a little when I try to move. It seems I don't have the strength to do anything. Other than that, I've never felt better actually. I too enjoyed our fight greatly, she said with a smile of her own. Pan acknowledged that answer with a happy face. Well, it is something to be expected after all. You clearly must have spent a great deal of magical energy to be able to fight me in an even ground. It is not surprising that you must be utterly exhausted after inflicting such strain into your body, so you should take things easy for a while to let your body recuperate from such ordeal. She said with a hint of seriousness despite her gleeful attitude, letting the blue-haired goddess know that she expected her to follow her instructions to the letter without complaint. The alien girl then turned back towards Belldandy to put matters back on tracks, her demeanor losing all cheerfulness in a moment. So, must I expect some kind of retaliation from the Kami-sama of this world for having picked up a fight with one of her goddesses? I assume that all the collateral damage that our little fight brought about must have certainly not made him very happy, so I need to know if there is going to be a problem between us. Pan said the most cordially she could, but with an underlying threatening tone in her voice, making it known she would not let herself be pushed around by anybody, not even by Kami-sama himself. As it is, Belldandy simply sighed tiredly, knowing that this whole situation was a mess. She decided the best course of action she could take was to answer the questions of the alien girl as truthfully as she could and give her opinion on how she supposed that Kami-sama would react to this problem. Honestly, I don't believe Father will take any kind of reprisal against you since you are alien to this world and galaxy and thus not of his jurisdiction, also because it was not you who instigated this confrontation between you and Lind. True, you proved to be quite unreasonable in your drive of carrying out your fight against her after the challenge was made, and also your unwillingness in letting the matter drop without confrontation, but most of the fault could be placed on Lind for having come in search of you and issuing the challenge in the first place, revealing the existence of the gods to the entire mortal world in the first place. Not to mention, taking out her limiter without permission and unleashing her true divine power upon the earth, causing untold destruction and damage to the planet in the process. So I expect her punishment to be quite severe, she said, growing pensive by the end of her explanation. Pan simply stood there, listening to the entire speech without any reaction whatsoever. And what kind of punishment could we expect to be given upon Lin because of this? She plainly asked. Belldandy brought a finger to her chin in nervous consideration as she thought about the matter. I really don't know. I mean, this matter is pretty serious. Not only she willingly took her limiter off, which is something strictly forbidden for any goddess to do unless under strict orders from Kami-sama himself, but she also broke the law regarding to never reveal our presence to humanity as a whole, A law that had been agreed by both gods and demons to follow ever since the truce between heaven and hell was signed and the doublet system was enforced. Breaking this law could mean the end to the doublet system, and it would spark a war between the forces of heaven and hell that would threaten the stability of the mortal world too. The final confrontation between the forces of good and evil, the end of everything as we know it. Ragnarok, the war of the end of times, Erd said, interjecting for her sister with utmost seriousness. Most of the fighters hearing the conversation simply paled at the implication that the real apocalypse may actually come to pass due to the rash actions of the blue-haired goddess for having picking up a fight against Pan without thinking in the least about the consequences of her actions. Certainly the end of the world was not a promising prospect that none of the humans present was looking forward to, well except Jackal, who seemed rather intrigued by that information, but everybody is aware of his weird fetishes. The other remaining fighters, however, tried not to show any outward reaction to this information by playing it cool, but one could still take notice of their nervousness by the cold sweat that fell from their brows and down the back of their necks. After all, they all had witnessed what Lind was capable of. Having seen the power and destruction that a single goddess could unleash left them with a horrible sense of dread at the thought of armies composed of who knows how many soldiers, and they were pretty certain that the armies of heaven were vast, just as powerful as her, fighting against demonic armies that could match them in both numbers and strength. Against such overwhelming power, they held no illusions that any nation of Earth would be able to withstand such might. During this entire revelation, Beerus simply kept recording all of the proceedings and uploading the video into the internet for the world to see, as per Pan's orders, without anyone being the wiser. Curious how most people tended to ignore or forget all about his presence or the fact he could record all audio or images that passed in front of his lenses, must be because his small size made everybody consider him harmless and discard him from further consideration when faced with more pressing immediate concerns. Oh, it seems not all of Pan's followers were that irresponsibly blind to their surroundings, as Dr. Jackal tipped his hat at him with a knowing smile. It was clear that the homicidal doctor knew pretty well what he was up to. He could also detect Kushinada, the blonde assassin Nina Williams, Pan's secretaries and Foxy, giving him surreptitious glances from the corners of their eyes. Well, it's a good thing to know that Pan has some efficient talent among her followers, ranks. Pan immediately gave her opinion about a war sparking between the divine and demonic forces by grabbing Belldandy from the lapels of her dress and getting on her face with the utmost serious demeanor she could muster. Listen to me clearly, I will not allow a war to break out and destroy all civilization on this world. Not while I am still dwelling on it. So if any of you goddesses or demons try to do anything to start a war, I will personally hunt all of you down and take your heads as trophies to hang from the walls of this building. She said with a cold look as she stared at the brunette goddess right in the eyes. Normally Belldandy, despite her kind nature, was not someone who could easily be intimidated by any kind of threats. However, looking upon the resolute expression of the alien girl made her believe that Pan indeed would move sea and earth in order to fulfill her ultimatum. She gave a sober nod to the Saiyantine to tell her she understood her words. Pan let the goddess free and turned around to put some space between them. So tell me, what kind of punishment we can expect to be enacted upon Lind? She repeated her main question, leading the conversation back to the topic of her interest. Belldandy straightened her clothes, unmindful of the rough treatment she had been subjected not a moment ago with all the humbleness of a goddess of her caliber. Well, if I were to guess, I'd say the most likely outcome would be for her to have her goddess license being revoked. She said half in thought. Goddess license? Asked Pan in puzzlement. The brunette goddess replied with a nod. We goddesses need to have a license in order to carry on with our divine functions and responsibilities according to our station. Just like here on Earth you humans need a license in order to drive a car or having a profession like a doctor or a pilot, so too, we goddesses need a license to avail the fact that we are capacitated to do our jobs. She explained. That answer caught many off guard who hadn't expected that the gods of this earth would have such a bureaucratic system in place. It certainly gave credence to the alien girl's claims about a divine bureaucracy that handles all aspects of the afterlife. Wait, does that mean that you gods have to take exams and deal with evaluations just the same we normal people do in order to keep our jobs? Asked a very surprised Whip, who had not expected this new revelation. Do you have to go to some kind of school and do tests just as we do too? Belldandy simply nodded amicably. Of course, we goddess have to study a lot in order to prepare ourselves for any spot we would like to work on up in heaven, and we have from time to time, take tests to evaluate our performance on our spots to show we are capable to get the job done. But this is not only to show our proficiency in our workstations but also primarily to determine the rank we will hold as a goddess. The higher our rank, the more spots are available for us to choose from as a career. Understandable, as you can't expect for a low-level goddess to be prepared and able to deal with the same kind of responsibilities and functions that a high-ranked one can do. She said, listing with her finger for emphasis. Pan grew pensive after hearing that explanation. So that would explain the title. Both you and Lind introduced yourselves when I asked your names. You both introduced yourselves as first-class goddesses unlimited. The brunette goddess acknowledged that observation. Indeed, we both have attained the rank of goddess first class, and unlimited stands for the status of our license, as it can be limited or unlimited. As unlimited goddesses there are very few things that are forbidden to us, and also most of the information and functions stored in the Yggdrasil are available to us. Only Kami-sama himself is above us. She explained. The Yggdrasil. Hold on a minute, what does the world tree have to do with your work as goddesses? Asked Foxy curiously after hearing that particular piece of information. The World Tree is the divine supercomputer that regulates all aspects of creation on this galaxy. It also regulates the flow of power we goddesses can use when we take our limiters off, and allows us to manifest in this world by taking these forms you see in front of you. Belldandy explained, motioning to herself, her sisters and Lind. These forms in front of us. Are you saying the way we are seeing you and your sisters is not in reality your true forms? Mature inquired as most of the usual female posse that hanged around Pan began to take position behind the alien girl, now with the addition of Kushinada. Belldandy simply kept answering all questions with her usual kind demeanor. Correct, we goddesses are actually higher dimensional beings that exist in a higher plane of creation. In order for us to manifest safely in this dimension, we require the aid of the Yggdrasil to provide us with these vessels to be able to interact with the human world. For if we were to try to manifest our real bodies, this planet would simply not be able to withstand our true forms and be inevitably destroyed because of it, so the Yggdrasil plays an important role in sealing and regulating the power a goddess can use while being on Earth. The fighters, hearing her, simply remained silent, listening to her explanation. Those with a better understanding and education related to this type of matters thought over the implications of this revelation, wondering about how powerful the world's supercomputer must be if it is able to keep sealed at all times the power of an undetermined number of beings as powerful as Lind. An advanced machine like that was simply beyond the understanding, not to mention the technological means, of mortals. Yuri scratched her head in puzzlement as she was having some trouble in understanding what was being spoken about, her beat-up, bandaged state notwithstanding. So, this Yggdrasil thing, is it a tree or a computer? I'm not quite following what you're saying. It is both at the same time, actually. The brunette goddess simply replied with her usual kind, happy face. That answer did nothing but leave the people that was listening to her even more stumped than what they already are. Both. How can it be both? How does a goddamn tree work as a computer? It doesn't have any damn sense. Foxy exclaimed, getting all riled up by something that to her sensibilities was considered nothing more than nonsense. Please, do not blaspheme, Belldandy admonished with a sudden stern look, making the white-haired fencer woman to immediately shut up, growing cowed alongside most of the onlookers by the unexpected commanding presence being showed by the usually calm goddess. Yes, even Pan, as due to her young age, she was still susceptible to react towards displays of disciplinary authority from parental figures. AKA Mom is getting angry, so shut up and stop acting like a brat. It was a reflex action ingrained in the teen Saiyan psyche due to how the women of her family could turn pretty scary when their patience grew thin. Even though her mother, grandmother and aunt were just regular humans, Pan knew better than to try to go against their word when they got that angry look in their eyes that signaled an explosion of motherly outrage, and when that happened, none of the men in her family were able to give them the contrary. And they were full-blooded or half-blooded Saiyans. Certainly the women of her family were strong from the way they kept their husbands and children in line and asserted their authority when the time came of laying down the law. So yeah, Pan Cold recognized the same look in Beldandy's face and posture and knew it was time to shut up and not make any sudden movements if she didn't wanted to get chastised and or receive a lecture as well. Gasped Ah. The horror. Thankfully the situation was diffused by Foxy as she apologized for her crass expression. Sorry, she said in a very tiny and contrite voice. Not much for an apology, but it seemed to get the job done as Beldandy began to smile again and appear pleased. Apology accepted, was all she said before getting back to her explanation. Now, the reason why the Yggdrasil is both a tree and a computer is because it can be made to manifest in the mortal world on several forms, a tree being the primary among them. Just like the way we goddesses manifest in these human forms while here on Earth instead of our real bodies. She placidly stated. So, it is a magical computer tree that can change form? Yuri asked, still pretty much out of her depth if her confused expression was any indication. It is a tree, one of the main pillars that support this world, that was turned into a supercomputer to more easily link and oversee over all aspects of creation. It can change shapes and manifest through different ways here in the physical plane, according to what's considered best depending on the situation. And yes, it is magical in nature. The brunette goddess said in her gentle demeanor. It did nothing to help the human followers of the alien girl to better understand what she was saying, if nothing it simply made them to be even more confused. Erd decided to intercede for the mortals, Sake with a sigh. Do not try to understand how is that things work in heaven. Just know that we are divine beings that possess magic and technology beyond any of you that allows us to do things that may be totally impossible for most mortals on this world. She absent-mindedly said with a distinct lack of emotion, as she found the notion of trying to make mortals understanding the intricacies of heaven too troublesome. The gathered fighters decided to take her at her word and move on to another subject to avoid the headache. So, exactly what is that you goddesses do? Do you have to listen to people's prayers all day and try to lend a hand by working behind curtains or what? Asked Whip intrigued. Beldandy just shook her head sideways in a negative. We goddesses cannot directly reply to people's prayers, because to do so would require a heavy involvement from our part. You may ask why we don't then make the effort to become more involved in human affairs. The truth is most of us goddesses have no problem in taking a more direct stance on matters regarding Earth. However, doing so would be a breach to the truce we have with the demons and a serious offense against the doublet system we have in place to keep the peace between both sides. The doublet system is the system that was put in place to balance things between heaven and hell and maintain the truce between both sides. Its task is to make sure that the forces of either side are always even and one does have an upper hand over the other. So for each action made be either heaven or hell, there must be an exactly opposite action from the opposite side to counterbalance it. With that in mind, a more direct involvement from our part would also mean that the demons will have a free rein to appear and cause havoc on Earth, which would result in a gradual escalation of hostilities between heaven and hell. And that is something I'm sure none of you would like to see happening. So most of the time, all we can do is trying to help humanity through indirect means. Though there are ways for us to act more directly, but that is only reserved for specific circumstances and for a very determined type of mortals. What do you mean by that? Asked Mature respectfully. After all, she was talking to a real-life goddess and she was pretty aware that despite her seemingly gentle and kind demeanor, she possessed a terrifying power hidden within her. The battle between Pan and Lind had been a certain proof of that, so it may well pay to show a modicum of deference. Well, you had asked what is what we do, so allow me to clarify. I as a first-class goddess unlimited am in charge of attending the helpline of the Goddess Relief Office. Beldandy stated happily. Goddess Relief Office. Repeated Mature in puzzlement. Yes, a special department of heaven that is in charge of looking for specific individuals that meet a certain criteria in order to grant them a wish to fulfill their heart's desire. The gentle goddess explained. That answer brought immediate responses from all the listeners. A wish. You mean you can grant wishes to mortals despite telling us you can't directly intervene in humans' affairs? Isn't that a little contradicting? Whip replied with a puzzled expression. The brunette goddess simply replied with a shake of her head. Not really, as I had said, we can only grant wishes to individuals who perfectly meet the criteria imposed by Kami-sama. Only less than 1% of the human population in the entire planet is considered worthy enough for a wish. Our office is in charge of screening through the entire population of Earth in search of those people that can be deemed worthy. And we are very thorough in our work. That reply was enough to shut up any comment that the gathered fighters may have, and leave them wondering about how strict the standards of heaven must be if only less than 1% of the human population has been able to meet such requirements. Foxy seemed pensive for a moment before formulating another question. These wishes, what do they entail? Is there any restriction to what you can wish for once you have been deemed worthy? She inquired with interest. Again, Belldandy replied with another shake of her head. No, there is no limit whatsoever when making a wish. You can ask for whatever you may like: money, power, influence, women. Nothing is beyond our reach. Even wishing for the destruction of the world is possible. She explained. Nina Williams retorted at that in a brisk, dry tone. I doubt any of the people you have chosen has actually considered that option, since I don't think you goddesses would pick a person of questionable morals as a candidate for a wish. She stated with a scoff. The brunette goddess acknowledged the observation of the blonde assassin. You are correct, we would never choose a person of black heart as a candidate for a wish. It was just an example to show that there are no restrictions imposed when making a wish, everything is fair. So it depends more in what the chosen individuals truly want rather than any limitation from our part. It is the fulfillment of the heart's desire what we aim for after all. She explained affably in soft tones of voice that seemed almost hypnotic due to how sweet they were. HMMP, what are the requirements needed then to be considered worthy of a wish? Whip asked, assuming a thoughtful expression. It must be a truly honest person with a noble soul. As you must know, most humans nowadays can only think about themselves. Caring only about the pursuit of power, riches, fame, or control over the lives of others without stopping to consider about the consequences of their actions. What we goddesses are in the lookout for are those people who put the needs of others before their own without expecting any kind of reward in exchange. A truly selfless soul, those who have only done good and never wished to bring harm upon others, have never done or tried to willingly hurt a fellow human being, who would instead rather give their lives to aid a stranger that they have never met before. Only those that represent the best in humanity can ever be considered worthy of a wish. Belldandy explained as looked over the assembled mortals with a sad, merciful look, as if she knew exactly what every single one has done in their lives, and instead of feeling affronted or disgusted, she just felt a boundless pity for them. The gathered fighters did not feel comfortable by the sorrowful look that the goddess was giving to them. Do people like that actually exist? Whip asked hesitantly in a tiny voice, knowing full well she would never be worthy of a wish. Belldandy smiled and turned her head to look at Keiichi tenderly. They do. There was no more time to continue this trend of inquiry, however. Yeah, all this seems pretty interesting and whatnot, but back to my original question. Pan interrupted, believing the conversation to have deviated far enough from its original subject and wanting to get things back on track. What kind of punishment are we to expect Lynn to receive? Belldandy grew pensive again as she once more thought about such distressing subject. Well, as I had said, she will most definitively get her license as goddess revoked and be suspended from her post for an undetermined amount of time. All of her powers will most likely be completely sealed and her angels taken away from her. She would most probably be forced to live here on Earth as a mortal person. One of the most common punishments done to teach humility to a goddess is to banish her to Earth with all of her powers sealed and force her to live as a regular human being for a few centuries. Taking into consideration the severity of her transgression, it will be millennia before Lind is allowed to rejoin our ranks. The brunette goddess explained with a hint of sorrow for her fellow goddess. Pan took into consideration everything that she had heard before formulating her next question. When can we expect for Kami-sama to carry out his punishment? She asked pointedly. Belldandy was about to reply, but suddenly the ringtone of a cell phone began to be heard blaring throughout the place. Seeing how everybody was politely keeping quiet and taking their turn to speak, the ringing of the cell phone jarringly sticked out over the rather serious mood that permeated the place. Everybody present traced the source of the noise back towards Mature, the secretary brought a hand inside her vest pocket and pulled out the ringing device, holding it in her hand for all to see, her features taking a puzzled expression as all eyes fell on her. Belldandy just took a single glance at the ringing apparatus before locking eyes with the confused secretary. I think right about now, the goddess' answer certainly did nothing to calm the tense mood that had suddenly fallen over all the people in the room. Mature could only stare at her chiming cell phone, wondering what to do as everybody waited expectantly with bated breath for whatever that may happen. Finally deciding to take the call, the blonde bombshell opened the little device and pressed the receiving button. As soon as she did it, a surge of bright blinding light exploded from the device that suddenly became overflowed with energy, making the blonde buxom woman drop the phone to the floor in alarm. All the fighters, injured or otherwise, were forced to cover their eyes from the piercing light that flooded the entire room in white. Even Pan was forced to put a hand over her face to protect her visual senses. As the light kept shining, a glowing white figure suddenly began to appear from the brilliant screen of the cell phone and materialize into the room. First a hand, then a head, followed by a body, until a complete winged female figure was left hovering and glowing over the room. The light finally dimmed down and all the people present were able to discern the features of the newcomer, a short dark-haired brunette woman, dressed in a skimpy revealing outfit that was some kind of leotard made of some unknown black fabric that was missing sections in two strategically placed locations to leave almost her entire midriff bare and revealed a great deal of cleavage. It almost seemed to be a two-piece bikini instead of a leotard, except for the small bit of fabric that kept the upper and lower section of the suit together, allowing her to display her legs and figure in all her glory. She also wore a very strange-looking orange garment that seemed to serve as a low-cut shawl that was wrapped around the lower side of her breasts, arms, shoulders and back, allowing her to display her impressive assets. Orange gloves and shoes finalized the outfit. For the wings displayed, it was more than clear then she was another goddess. The newcomer goddess just lowered herself and set foot back in the ground as her wings simply dissipated in a small whirlwind of feathers. Belldandy simply stared at the skimpy-dressed goddess with a collected, calm look. Pierth, was all she said. The newly arrived goddess, recently identified as Pierth, turned her stare towards her fellow goddess and acknowledged her with a nod. Belldandy, the kind brunette goddess, simply let out a resigned sigh, knowing pretty well what Pierth was doing here. You're here because of Lind, are you not? Pierth nodded again in confirmation. That's right. Kami-sama was really furious when he discovered that Lind had come to the human world without permission just to pick a fight, took off her limiter and almost destroyed the whole planet by trying to release her full power. And let's not speak about revealing the existence of the gods to the mortals, which is a serious violation to the treaty we have with the demons and puts in jeopardy the doublet system, threatening to start a war with the forces of hell. Sigh, she really messed things up big time with her little stunt. She explained before falling silent. An uncomfortable silence hung upon the room as the people present was still reeling from the unexpected appearance of the dark-haired brunette goddess and her proclamation. Lind eventually spoke, rising from her position and approaching Pierth despite her wounds until she was face to face in front of her fellow goddess, her angels lending some assistance to help the blue-haired goddess getting back on her feet. Not showing an ounce of hesitation or anxiousness, even though she was very well aware that she was about to receive a very steep punishment, she just simply decided to face the music with all the dignity and unwavering determination that only a goddess of her station could show. What is to be my punishment then? I'll face whatever sentence dictated by Kami-sama without complaint. I know my actions caused a lot of destruction and havoc on the world, and I'm willing to work without rest to fix the problem that I created. But despite everything that has happened, I do not regret even once having challenged Pan to a fight. So go ahead, and carry on with my punishment. I'll accept it graciously, she declared as she simply stood expectantly, waiting for her sentence. Pierth just stared at the blue-haired with an accusing look before letting out a tired sigh. She too wasn't looking forward to carry out the sentence imposed by Kami-sama. Your license as a goddess has been revoked and you've been relieved from your duties as the commander of the Valkyries. More so, you are forbidden to return to heaven and be sentenced to live here on earth as a mortal with all of your powers and magical abilities sealed. That includes your angels, which will be taken from you, and will be expected of you to lend a hand in fixing all the damage you have caused while in this condition. Moreover, You will remain here in the human world until Kami-sama deems it that you have learned your lesson," she said, eliciting winces from the other 3 goddesses present in the room. Lind simply remained quiet as she heard her sentence, taking her time to digest what she'd been told. Pierre at least had the decency of giving her all the time she needed, knowing that the news she just gave must have been pretty distressing for the blue-haired goddesses. She was practically being stripped from her position and expelled from heaven for who knows how long while forced to live as a mortal without any of her powers. Despite this news, Lind didn't give any outward reaction of what she must have been feeling, accepting for her long silence. After a few long moments, the white-clad goddess finally spoke. "I just want to know one thing. Who will take my position as leader of the Valkyries after I am gone?" she asked with an utmost serious face, even though one could detect the traces of sadness in her expression. "Your second-in-command Rainer will take over your duties as commander of the Valkyries for the duration of your suspension," Pierre simply replied. Lind acknowledged that information with a nod. "Rainer is still young. She is impatient, hot-headed and brash, but I have trained her well and she has always excelled in all her lessons during her service under me. She knows how to do her duty. She will be an apt replacement for my position for the duration of my suspension." Pierre did her best to refrain from letting out a huff at that statement. "As hot-headed as she is, you have little room to be accusing her of such, seeing how it was your own brashness that caused this mess on the first place," the skimpy-dressed goddess said in a casual tone, eliciting a small flinch from Lind, before she simply shrugged. "But you're right that she will be a decent replacement for you. Kami-sama knows this too. That is why he proposed her to take your place. You've done a good job training her, curbing her more radical tendencies and instilling into her a sense of duty. So yes, she will do her job." Pierre then let out a dry laugh as if she had just realized something ironically funny. "You know, I am not worried about if she is qualified or not to take the command of the Valkyries, but rather than her following on your footsteps the moment she gets ear about what happened to you. You know she admires you very much, don't you? All the Valkyries under your command have always looked up to you with the greatest of respect. The reason they always tried their best is because they have never wanted to see you looking down on them with disappointment. We've always known that the loyalty of the Valkyries has been more towards their commander than to any other. You are very dear to every single one of them, and Rainer more so than the rest. She will not be happy to know that the reason of her promotion is because of her commander's fall from grace. She may try to come here to the human world to see you and will probably attempt to do something incredibly stupid in an effort of making you be accepted back into heaven," the dark-haired brunette goddess said with an uncharacteristical serious demeanor. Lind just shrugged at that statement. "It can't be helped. I must take responsibility for my actions. If Rainer indeed comes to the human world to try to see me, I'll make sure of sending her back," she stated plainly before taking a deep breath and rolling her shoulders in preparation for her punishment. "All right, let's get this done. Go ahead and carry out my sentence." Pierre grimly nodded before a floating hollow screen suddenly appeared out of nowhere in front her and she began to type a set of commands into it. She addressed Lind one last time. "For the record, I've never wished to see you expelled from our ranks despite our differences, but orders are orders," she said as she pushed one last button. Almost immediately, rings made of holographic lines of data suddenly materialized surrounding Lind and her angels. Energy started to pulsate out from the blue-haired goddess as if her power was being sapped from her, which most certainly was. The rings of data surrounding the angels began to spin around them, forming a bubble that left the 2 little angels trapped and cut off from their owner as their connection with Lind was being severed. After the deed was done, the rings around Lind disappeared and the brunette goddess fell to her knees, her strength failing her as all her energy was utterly spent and she was subjected to the pain and weakness brought by her wounds. She could do nothing but just stare as her 2 little angels were dragged away from her by a stream of codalines back towards the glowing screen of Mature's cell phone. The 2 cute seraphim, struggling and punching against the walls of their holographic prison, desperation and anxiety etched on their little faces as they did what they could to avoid being taken away from their owner. Showing very clearly on their innocent faces that they didn't want to leave Lind's side as they looked back at the goddess as if pleading her to not let them go, their cries echoing through the suddenly very still and quiet room as none of the people present found the current situation not in the least funny. All the efforts of the little angels to not being taken away proved fruitless, as all it did was make the scene of the two seraphims being dragged away hard to watch, as it had too many parallelisms with the images of children being ripped from the arms of their mothers. The little angels must really love Lind, and it seemed the removal of her angels had truly affected her, for she couldn't stop a tear from falling from her eye. "Goodbye, my old friends, my first true friends, I'll miss you so much," she said to the only companions that she had ever known for most of her life, unconsciously stretching a hand after her angels as one could hear the heart-wrenching sadness on her voice. Pan had enough. A sudden beam of energy struck the glowing cell phone without warning, causing the small communication device to disappear in a small explosion of fire and sparks. The holographic prisons holding Lind's angels faded away immediately, and the two-winged seraphim quickly launched themselves back towards their master, tackling the blue-haired goddess down to the floor in a fierce hug. Pierce simply gaped at what had transpired and turned to stare at the alien girl, who was still pointing with a stretched smoking finger at the direction where the cell phone once was, with a stumped expression, not believing someone was bold enough to interfere with one of Kami-sama's mandates. "What in the name of the ultimate force do you think you're doing?" she asked in an incredulous tone. Pan simply brought down her finger and crossed her arms with a nonchalant attitude. "What am I doing? I am simply stopping an injustice against someone I have begun to consider a friend. I can accept the fact that you wish to punish Lind for her actions, and I agree about making her clean the mess she and I made. However, taking her angels away from her is just too far. You may seal all of her magical powers, strip her from her position as a goddess and force her to live here on Earth as a lowly mortal, but I will not tolerate any of you laying a single hand on her angels," she stated with finality, as she assumed a no-nonsense disposition that clearly told she was not going to budge a single step on her decision. Pierre, alongside the three Norn sisters and Keiichi, stared with a flabbergasted expression. What do you mean you will not tolerate us taking her angels? Who do you think you are to get in the way of one of the edicts from Kami-sama himself? Do you know exactly what are you doing? Are you aware of the exact repercussions that could happen because of your intrusion? We are walking in very thin ice already after Lind revealed the existence of the gods to the entire world and almost destroyed the planet in the process. If we don't punish Lind severely for her breaching of the truce treaty we have with the demons, then we risk all-out war between the forces of heaven and hell. Do you know what that means? It will be the end of the world," the dark-haired brunette goddess exclaimed in a fast-paced irate tirade while gesturing wildly with her hands to make her point across. Pan did not care in the least for her reasons and plainly replied, "I am pretty aware that there's a threat of a war erupting between heaven and hell. Beldandi already explained this to us." She motioned towards said goddess. "But let me tell you that I do not give a damn about your problems, and if anyone tries to do any funny business then they will have to answer directly to me. I don't care if it is a goddess from heaven or a demon from hell. You try to pull this kind of shit while I'm still on this planet and I am kicking all of your asses evenly," the alien girl simply stated with the same uncaring resolution for what her species are famous for. Pierre just spluttered at Pan's unsubtle threats, completely mind-boggled by the alien girl's brashness. If she believed Lind to be a stubborn hardhead, then she clearly has never met a Saiyan. Meanwhile Keiichi simply scratched the side of his head in confusion. "I don't understand, what is the big deal of leaving Lind with her angels? I mean, I know they are supposed to help a goddess with their casting when trying to do high-level spells, but with Lind having all of her divine powers and magical abilities sealed, wouldn't that make their boosting skills completely useless since there would be no magical energy for them to tap into in the first place?" he asked pointedly. "That's not how things work." Pierre disagreed, moving her head sideways in a negative. Even with her whole powers sealed, she could still use her angels to hack into the Yggdrasil and lift the restriction on her powers. "So you see why we cannot simply leave her angels with her, since they can be used to help her ignore the punishment imposed by Kami-sama. Don't care, that's your problem. If I say Lind's angels stay, then they will stay in here and there's not one goddamn thing you can do about it," Pan said cuttingly, showing exactly how very little she cared about the dark-haired brunette goddess' problems. Pierre was about to voice her displeasure, when suddenly another cell phone began to ring. Everybody was distracted by the little chiming noise and turned to trace its source. It was the other secretary's cell phone, Vice, that was ringing. The blood-red-haired woman pulled out her compact communication device and stared at it warily for a moment. Not at all that odd. After what had happened with Mature's own cell phone, she had more than enough reasons to be suspicious. The attractive secretary opened her cell phone before facing the screen of the device away from her and covering her eyes with one hand, fully expecting something like the arrival of another goddess to happen to her too. She then pressed the receive button. Nothing happened. Finding no immediate reaction like another explosion of blinding light, Vice proceeded to put her cell phone to her ear to determine who was calling. Yes, who is it? She asked neutrally to whoever was on the line. As she was hearing the response to her question, the people watching her were able to clearly see how her expression unexpectedly changed from guarded and reserved to utterly awestruck. She turned towards Pierre. "It's for you, it's Kami-sama," she said with a completely stumped face. The rest of the fighters hearing that statement felt their eyes bulges in reaction, as they too were left flabbergasted at that revelation. Pierre simply approached and grabbed the small communication device from Vice's hand before putting the cell phone to her ear. Yes, sir. I tried to enact the corresponding punishment as you ordered, but I'm afraid a situation came up, yes. That's exactly what happened. She won't let me. There's no way to avoid a confrontation if I try to carry out my orders. Yes, I've already tried to explain the situation to her, but she just won't budge. Are you sure? Well, you're Kami-sama, so it's your call. Okay, sir. Yes, I'll pass you to her. The scantily clad goddess turned towards the alien girl and extended the cell phone on her hand to her. Kami-sama wants to speak with you, was all she said. Pan, unimpressed, simply swiped the offered phone on a single rough move, the action considered quite rude by the dark-haired brunette goddess. Not that the alien girl cared. Pan put the cell phone to her ear. So, I finally get to speak with the Kami-sama in charge of this planet. I must say I've yet to find anything remarkable about this little backwater of yours. What is that you want? Whatever it is, that Kami-sama replied to Pan's rather crass greeting. It was only good to make the alien girl scoff. Please, I've told your little goddess that I will not allow Lin's angels to be taken away from her. I don't care whatever your problems are or whether if my intervention ends up causing a war between heaven and hell. The angels stay and that's final. There's nothing you can do or say to make me change my decision. I have enough power to blow up this planet several hundred times over if so I wished. So if either you or one of those demons tries anything, you all will have to answer to me. Your balance means nothing to me. I'm not from this planet in the first place, remember. Whatever this doublet system you have in place is, I'm not part of it, so I don't have to respect it or limit my actions if I don't want to, Faye. Well, if you don't like it, you're free to come in here and fight me to do otherwise yourself instead of sending your minions to do your bidding. We Saiyans have no respect for those who don't show their faces or work only from the shadows. Maybe the little primitives that live on this planet are left odd when standing in your presence, but you are not the first Kami-sama I've met, nor does your position as god of this planet is anywhere near to that of the Kais, who my family has close ties with. So pardon me for not being impressed by your demands. Just as the alien girl was about to continue with her bickering, a portal suddenly appeared in the middle of the room. The fighters lying around were caught off guard by this sudden development and found themselves out of their depths, wondering what was about to happen now. Did Pan's blunt manners have drawn the ire of Kami-sama? The alien girl grew tense immediately as her eyes narrowed at the sight of the portal. She kept herself at the ready expecting an attack. The tension in the room quickly dissipated and was replaced by confusion when a small-robed toddler with a pacifier in his mouth and wearing a big Chinese hat with the words Junior emblazoned in it, appeared walking out from the portal. Behind the toddler, a young girl of around 16 with teal hair in a ponytail, wearing a kimono and carrying a broom, appeared following him. Wait, hold down your horses. There's no need for you to make an enemy out of Kami-sama. Allow me to speak to him and I'll put an end to this misunderstanding, said the child, raising a hand in front of him to signal her to stop. The Saiyan teen just frowned at him. Who are you? The small child tipped his big hat at her and offered a small bow. Greetings, I am Koenma from the Soul Office that's in charge of judging the souls of mortals in this sector of space. This is Botan, my assistant. the toddler said, motioning towards the girl at his side, who greeted with a foolish wave of her hand. Hi, the child spoke again. I carry a message from my uncle, King Yema, to the Kami-sama of Earth. That statement brought a reaction from the alien girl. You're King Yema's nephew. And what do you mean by the sole office of this sector? According to your uncle, there only exists one single office that is in charge of judging the souls of the departed in the entire universe. How come this galaxy deserves special treatment to have a sole office only for itself? She asked with great distrust. The small child simply rubbed the back of his head in nervousness. It's complicated, and it would take a long time to explain. Just lend me that phone and allow me to speak with Kami-sama. Pan narrowed her eyes at him in suspicion. Why do you want to speak with Kami-sama? Don't you see I'm in the middle of a discussion with him? She pointed out with annoyance in her voice. It is exactly for that reason that I must speak with him. I know you two are arguing about the punishment that Lind will have to suffer. But I promise you, if you let me speak with Kami-sama, I will take him off your back, since I have a proposition for him that will leave all parties involved in this business satisfied while still avoiding a war between heaven and hell. The small child explained with a tiny sense of urgency in his voice. Pan would be lying if she said she was not interested. How is that possible? I was led to believe that Lin's actions were a serious breach of the truce between heaven and hell. How would you be able to stop the mounting tensions of both sides without resulting in a confrontation? She asked with honest puzzlement. That is because of me, a new voice said in the room. Pan's sight immediately honed to a third person coming out from the portal, a dark-skinned white-haired preteen girl of seemingly 13 years old, the girl sporting a devious grin on her face. She had the same kind of tattoos on her face like those of the goddesses, only that instead of being blue, they were a crimson red. Behind the prepubescent girl, a blonde curly-haired woman appeared dressed in some tight black pants and red corset. She too had red markings on her face. Before anyone could speak, Lind reacted to the presence of the girl by taking hold of her halberd with one hand and shooting towards the newcomer, intending of smashing her with her weapon. The white-haired girl simply raised her index finger as she kept grinning and stopped the attack against her person in cold, the resulting shockwave rattling the foundations of the Shinpaku Alliance headquarters and physically pushing against the people in the room, forcing them back a step and roughly awakening those that were resting. Lind, what the fuck? Pan exclaimed, not in the least amused after the little stunt of the blue-haired goddess. The bronze-skinned girl just continued smirking as she kept Lind's halberd at bay with only her finger. Well, Lin-chan, I didn't know you missed me that much. It makes my heart flutter with emotion to see you still remember me. The girl said in a joyful, amused tone. The people in the room didn't know if she was being truthful or simply making fun of the white-clad goddess. Damakaicho Hild, the brunette said with extreme venom in her voice. That statement brought startled reactions from the fighters close around her. What did you just said? Whip asked, her mind going numb. Damakaicho, you mean this child is the ruler of hell? Foxy said, taken aback by the revelation. Pierce spoke, her demeanor totally serious as she focused solely on Hild. Damakaicho Hild, the demon queen and sole sovereign of Niflheim, all demons bow to her feet in fear and respect of her strength. Her power great enough to challenge that of Kami-sama himself. What is she doing here? She asked with mounting dread. Despite the apparent tense situation, there were those who clearly didn't give a fuck. Hey, Mara, Erd said, waving at the blonde woman behind the Damakaicho. Sup, Erd, was the simple reply of the demoness. Hild turned towards Erd, completely ignoring Pierce's question. Erd-chan, mommy missed you. Why don't you come here and give her a hug? The white-haired girl said, waving cheerfully to the goddess that now that everybody looked closely had an uncanny resemblance with her. The sudden foolish gesture making all the people in the room to fall to the floor on their faces at the unexpected idiocy of the moment. The ruler of hell was clearly not what anybody had expected. The bronze-skinned goddess grew irritated at her mother's antics as her eyebrows began to twitch uncontrollably. Forget it, you old hag. I'm not going to be hugging you for anything in this world, not even under threat of Ragnarok. The end of the world could come and go and still I wouldn't want to be anywhere near you. Erd stated petulantly as she crossed her arms and looked away from her mother in a fit. Erd-chan, That's not a nice thing to say. You're hurting mommy's feelings. I don't care. I will never acknowledge that you're my mother. Mother and Dogger just kept trading insults back and forth. The fighters present could do nothing but look in morbid fascination as how the ruler of hell engaged in a childish bickering with her own daughter. Hild teleported in front of Erd and stretched the Norn of the past's face as she pinched her cheeks. My sweet little Erd-chan, you're just as stubborn and thick-headed as your mama. It makes me proud to see you have so much of me in you, but it also is a source of great frustration. Why have you to be so obstinate? Just call me mother already and admit that you love me, she said as she increased the pressure on Erd's cheek. The white-haired goddess fought back by applying the same move on her so-called mother's cheeks. Keep dreaming, you prehistoric sow. I will never admit to such thing when I don't feel the slightest bit of affection towards you. Anything you may think otherwise is nothing more but the ravings of your senile mind, she said as she too stretched the face of her mother. Ungrateful little brat. Shriveled old cow. The people all around could do nothing more but stare and sweat drop at the antics of the two women. It may have been amusing to watch them both fight if it wasn't for the fact that both were very powerful divine beings hiding their true nature, or that it was pretty jarring to their senses to see a child disavowing its own progenitor in such infantile way. Not to mention that said progenitor looked much younger than her own child. Pan eventually had enough. She turned her head to give a pointed look to her secretaries while she tossed the cell phone in her hand to Koenma without looking, clearly telling them without words that they better do something to stop the bickering of the two bronze-skinned women. The two elegantly dressed aides shared a look to decide who would have the dubious honor of undertaking this task. Seemed the responsibility fell to Mature as she let out a tired sigh. Against her better judgment, the blonde secretary approached the two white-haired women with the intention of intervene and try to put an end to the squabble. That end, she also had a very strong interrogant that needed answer. She cleared her throat loudly. Ahem, excuse me, she interjected. The two bickering relatives stopped their struggle and turned to see who was interrupting them, the two still grabbing and pulling at each other's cheeks. To her credit, Mature did an excellent job in ignoring the stupid silly expressions that both bronze-skinned women had. She offered a greeting. Hi, sorry for interrupting your bonding moment. Miss Damakaicho. Hild was it. Yes, excuse me if I'm a bit too forward, and I hope you don't consider it too bold from my part for asking. But, we would really like to know, how is it that you can be the mother of the goddess Erd when you look, well, so young? She said, trailing off a little as she thought in the best words to make her question without insulting the leader of hell. The answer of the ruler of hell at that question came in the form of a cheeky smile. Oh, so nice of you to notice. I do take an awful lot of time and effort to keep my figure. I'm glad to know that people do acknowledge my looks, she said as she broke her hold on her daughter and took Erd's hands from her face. The Norn of the past reaction to that statement was a huff. Please. That is not her true form. What you're seeing is just a fragment of Hild's essence given sentience. An avatar of her will, if you like, to interact with the human world safely, since her power is so great that even when it is sealed to the barest minimum it is still dangerous enough to cause natural disasters and destruction across the earth. Erd's explanation leave the blonde woman stunned. What? Hild didn't seem much worried about her daughter spilling her secrets. Well, that's true. This is nothing but a little fragment of my power, a 1/1000th of my true strength. As the ruler of all hell, I am able to break pieces of myself to act as extra hands if I require my attention to be divided on several tasks, effectively being in two different places at once. Since this is a piece of me, it is connected to my main body and acts as an extension of my will. All it sees I see, and all it does it is so because I wanted it to do it in the first place. The Damakaicho explained with her cheeky smile still in place. And I can still keep dividing this body and create more copies of me by splitting all my available energy into each vessel. Observe, the ruler of hell declared as she stood at her full height, before she went poof. In a small burst of smoke, and two smaller Hilds appeared out of nowhere and began to run throughout the room, giggling and hooting like small children. Which apparently they were, at least in appearance. For although the Hild that was giving explanations just a moment ago looked as if she were a girl of 13, these two new chibi Hilds looked as if they were 6.5 each. The fighters in the room could do nothing but stare with bugged-out eyes at the small running children that were supposed to be the avatars of the Daimachaichos while on Earth. The two chibi hills proved to be quite the little devils, pun intended, as they jumped on top of tables and workstations and started to kick all the projects and experiments that Pan had been working on in there, or climb atop shelves and toss out all the things that were stored. Obviously, the alien girl didn't take kindly that someone was breaking all her stuff. Pan snatched up one of the chibi hills as she passed close to her and held her up with one hand. "That is enough, you little monsters. You lay your hands off my things if you know what is good for you," she threatened, bringing the deceptive child to her face as the control over her emotions slipped and she entered in a suppressed first Super Saiyan state without her notice. Most beings currently on this planet would certainly quake under the fulminant glare of such overwhelming powerful outworldly alien like Pan. But this is the Daimachaicho we are speaking about, the dictator queen of all demons who was enough power to destroy entire solar systems with only the tip of her pinky. So Pan's glare was totally ineffective on her. Moreover, it seemed to have the opposite effect that was intended and spurred Hild even more. The Daimachaicho grinned, raised a hand and traced it down the side of Pan's face. "I really like you the most when you are angered. Rage does suit your kind well. It is this same face that challenged the full might of a first-class goddess without restraint and brought me endless amount of amusement by watching such a match," she stated as she cupped Pan's face between her hands in a tender manner, catching the alien girl off guard, who even if she tried not showing her sudden unconformity, one could clearly tell she hadn't expected such reaction from the apparent child. Chibi Hild just kept grinning. "I would really like to see how high your anger can get. Shall we make a test?" she asked, her face showing her wicked excitement. Poof! Wah! Wah! Before once more disappearing in a cloud of smoke and dividing Herschel even further into two younger tiny little Hilds. As her previous form seemed to be that of a child of 6 years and something, her new clones were nothing more but mere toddlers barely 3 years old, the two baby chibi Hilds wasting no time to run away from the alien girl and start causing more mayhem around the room. "That looks fun, let me try that too," declared the other remaining chibi Hild before she too divided herself in two more, younger, copies that also began to wreck the place apart. Poof! Now there were 4 small tiny Hilds trying to see if a Saiyan can have green-white hair. The patience of the alien girl began to hang from a thin rope. She turned towards her followers. "What are you doing standing there, you idiots? Help me catch these menaces in miniature," she all but commanded with all the intimidating presence that a Super Saiyan can have. The fighters in the room scrambled to their feet to do as they were told. Even those who were not actually part of her forces like the Hokuto and Nanto heirs stood up to follow her instructions. After witnessing and feeling the great power she displayed during her fight with Lind, self-preservation told them that it was a terrible idea to leave anything capable of distressing her, running around freely. The tiny chibi Hilds proved to be quite the challenge to catch despite their size, or maybe it was because of their size that they were able to be quite the difficult targets to catch, as they got under chairs, tables, workstations, machinery and even between the legs of anyone they bumped into, whatever it may be. All was fair game to try and give their pursuers a hard time to catch them. Even the Norns found themselves dragged into the chase of the chibi Hilds, with Erd in particular being tormented and taunted by the chibi Hilds as she tried to lay her hands on one of them. It was Skuld who finally managed to catch one of the chibi Hilds, as she being the youngest of the Norns was able to use her short stature to better keep up with one of the Daimachaicho's mini-me's and tackle her to the ground from behind. Skuld then employed the weight of her own body to keep the smaller child pinned to the ground. "Gotcha. Now I've got you, you annoying little demon. Ack. No, let me go. No fair." It was in that moment that it was decided it would be better to let children catch other children, so the fighters in the room immediately deferred towards the only other 2 youngsters that could be considered children in the room. Kushinada looked down and addressed her adoptive daughter. "Chikage, I trust you're more than able to easily catch one of these rowdy children. Just take care not to do anything to injure them. We don't know what kind of powers they may possess," she said in a formal emotionless voice. The little girl just looked up to her adopted guardian and nodded silently in acknowledgement. Chikage then shot off in a burst of speed and easily brought down one of the other running chibi Hilds into the ground on her back. Her hands taking hold of the smaller white-haired girl's arms, keeping them in place and open as she practically sat atop of her, straddling her with her weight to keep her from moving. "Ah, no, no, let go, the tiny Hild said as she trashed about, unable to take the bigger girl of her as she felt as if being crushed by her weight pressing on her. Cheekage just shook her head sideways in a negative as she kept pinning the smaller girl. At the same time, Foxy turned and addressed Kula Diamond. "Sweetie, would you mind getting hold of one of these screaming little girls? I would really appreciate it." The blonde girl stopped eating her candies from where she was sitting in the floor and looked up at the white-haired woman. "Is it a game?" she asked with eyes that shined with innocence. "Well, if you want to look at things that way, sure. The goal of the game is catching one of the white-haired tykes you see running around and make sure they don't escape from you once you catch them. Just make sure not to go overboard. Remember that other children are not as durable as you." Foxy explained in a rather carefree tone, not really caring whether Kula thought this situation was a game or not. Whatever works to stop the tiny Hellions from continuing wrecking the place up and pissing Pan up. The blonde ice user joined the chase of the Chibi Hilds with a smile on her face. By this point the remaining Chibi Hilds had wised up that they were out to get them, so they stepped up their game as response. It only made for Kula to enjoy the game more, as she was more than able to keep up with the tiny Damakaichos as she jumped, slid, weaved, vaulted, dodged and evaded all obstacles in her way, be it objects or persons. The blonde girl laughed as she clearly enjoyed her playtime. Despite the best efforts of the remaining Chibi Hilds, the young ice user eventually caught up with one of them, bringing her down to the ground and hugging her tightly to her body to keep her from escaping. "Got you. Now you cannot escape, Taehi," the blonde girl declared with a giggle. The small Chibi Hild tried to wiggle out from Kula's grasp, but having no room to move as she was being hugged tightly from behind, she had to concede defeat. "Ah, yes, you got me," she admitted as her mood deflated. "Does that mean I won the game?" the young ice user asked to her captive with such an innocent look, puppy eyes included, that it managed to make Hild feel physically ill. The white-haired fake child grimaced. "Og, yes, whatever. You won. Just stop using those eyes on me," she exclaimed, trying to look anywhere but towards Kula and failing miserably. "Yay, I won, Kula exclaimed as she hugged the Chibi Hild closer to her and began to press her cheek on her face. The bronze-skinned toddler just made a face at the other girl's cuddles, but then found out it wasn't so bad. "Well, aren't you a tender one?" was all she said. With 3 out of 4 Chibi Hilds down, Pan and her clique began to look around the room in search of the missing Damakaicho's mini-me. "Well, that should take care of those 3. Now where is the remaining one?" the alien girl asked, glancing around the room. "Mistress, I don't want to pop your bubble, but we don't have any more small people present to help us catch the last vessel of the Damakaicho. The only other individual I can think of that could have lent us a hand in this endeavor is the little sister of your apprentice Kenichi. And she is in Kanto following her brother and the rest of this Shinpaku alliance, that you recently took control of, in their battle against the Kanto fighting schools." Mature explained in the most formal manner possible. Pan grew thoughtful for a moment. "We really need to think in another name for this organization. Shinpaku Alliance sounds so stupid." She trailed off. "Anyway, it's just one mini-clone left. I doubt we are going to have trouble catching her. But first we need to know where the little tyke went," she asked looking around the place. It was Whip who replied to that inquiry. "I think I found her," she said as she pointed at the back of the room with a blank face, a sweat drop on the side of her brow. Looking towards the direction indicated by her finger, the gathered fighters found Kula's guardian, Diana, hugging and cuddling the last one of the Damakaicho's mini-me's. "Ah, aren't you the cutest, prettiest, kissable, adorable little thing?" Yes, you are. Ah, I just want to squash you against me. You're so huggable. I feel like squeezing the life out of your little body," the dark blue-haired woman said as she did just that and squeezed the life out of the last Chibi Hild with a bone-crushing hug while bringing a rain of kisses down on her. "Somebody help me to get away from this crazy woman." The last Chibi Hild wailed in despair, a look of abject horror plastered on her face, and she tried to escape from the grasp of the overly affectionate woman. The people watching just stared and sweat dropped at the scene. Pan decided it was high time to bring an end to the madness. All right, enough with all of your shenanigans. Bring those 4 midgets to me, she ordered in an authoritative voice. The 2 girls, woman and child goddess, complied with the alien girl's order, knowing it would be unwise to do otherwise. The 4 chibi hills were left held in the air in front of Pan. The Saiyan teen just leveled a glare at the 4 natural disasters in miniature as she crossed her arms. Quote ellipsis dot. I hope you had your fun, she said in the most deadpan tone of voice ever. The 4 fake children just smiled unashamedly as reply. Yes, very much so, it was pretty amusing to see you and your followers getting all aggravated. Spoke one of the identical clones. Except for certain happenstances we would rather forget. At this the 4 chibi hills turned to glance at Diana with a look of dread before going back to stare at Pan. But other than that, it was really worth it. They admitted with a cheeky grin. I am so glad my personal distress brings you endless amount of fun. Pan said plainly with boundless sarcasm. Enough of your games, tell me now, what are you doing in here? Nah, screw that. What I want to know is how she is able to be a goddess if she is the daughter of the Daimokaicho. Whip interrupted, changing the topic of the conversation as she pointed at Erd. The white-haired goddess simply blinking in befuddlement at being called upon her family ties in such manner. It was Beldandy who answered that question. Erd may be the daughter of the Daimokaicho, but just like us, she is also the daughter of our father Kami-sama too. Our sister may come from a different mother and from different origins, but that doesn't make her any less our sibling, she said with unshakable conviction. Of course, that answer brought a whole string of extreme reactions from the gathered fighters. Kami-sama is your father, Whip exclaimed in shock as she turned towards Erd. Wait, does that mean that he and the Daimokaicho, she sputtered, trying to find a correct word that was not offensive. You know, did it? Oh, we did more than just that, one of the chibi hills said with endless amusement. We used to be married once. You may not believe this, but Kami-sama is quite the hot stud. Oh, just the memory of that manly hunk makes my mouth water. Too bad it didn't work out, we both had to go our separate ways. Me the ruler of hell, queen of all demons, he the leader of heaven and benevolent father-like figure. Yup, we ended up distancing from each other over time, but despite all that, he still holds a special place in my heart. The 4 mini-clones of the Daimokaicho then let out a lovey-dovey sigh before they got lost in memories of, well, most certainly unspeakable things. If the people witnessing her ramblings said that they were not disturbed by what they were seeing, they would be lying. I care not about stories of your married life, just tell me already what you're doing here, Pan stated in an unmoving tone. The 4 chibi hills only grinned as they began to join themselves into one being again, much to the shock of the girls and women that were holding them, until the original 13-year-old girl was whole once more. If I remember correctly, you asked Koenma what kind of offer he had for Kami-sama that could avoid a war between heaven and hell. That is the reason why I am here, for it is I who brought the offer to the negotiation table in the first place. Hild replied, her smile growing even smugger with each word she uttered. It left all of the audience that was hearing her completely baffled. Pan frowned in suspicion. Why would you, the ruler of hell, try to brook for peace between your armies and that of heaven? I would have thought for you to be ecstatic at the notion of wanton slaughter and destruction. You must be getting something out of this deal. What is the catch? She asked with distrust. Hild just kept grinning. Yes, you would expect that the ruler of heaven would be a cruel bloodthirsty monster with no other thought than to butcher anything standing on its sights. She giggled mirthfully. But that just simply shows how very little you know about our true nature or what really Ragnarok entails. Remember, Ragnarok is known as the war that would mark the end of the world, the end of all things. And it is not only something that applies exclusively to humans and gods, but to us demons too. Ragnarok would mean an end to all of our species, the humans, the gods, we demons, we will all end up dead in end. And I really do enjoy my life. So you see why it's not in my best interests to let a war between heaven and hell break out. She explained cheekily. Pan was not wholly convinced, however. There must be more to your willingness to maintain the peace than just simply to keep your hide safe. I don't believe a being like you will not have plans and contingencies in place to make sure you still end up staying on top in case a war breaks out. The chance of having a shot of ending untold lives of humans and goddesses alike must be too tempting for you to let it pass just like that. She discerned, not willing to trust in anything that may come out of Hild's mouth. The smile of the Daimokaicho simply spiked even more as amusement gleamed in her eyes. "Oh, you are quite the smart one, don't you?" she commented gleefully. "You are correct, there is more than just me wanting to save my skin as to why I considered approaching my ex-husband with an offer of peace before any kind of hostility could ignite between our sides." She stopped smiling and appeared to finally start speaking seriously, but there was still a hint of joyfulness in her demeanor. "The truth is I care nothing for war. Do not misunderstand, I do have a lot of loathing and contempt for most of those airheaded cloud huggers and would never let a chance pass me by where I can have the opportunity to ruin their day. But if war were to break out, the price to pay would be too steep in my opinion. It would mean the end of not only gods and demons, but also of the human world, and I must say I have a particular predilection towards humans." Pan was caught off guard by that declaration. "You care about humans?" she asked skeptical. Hild's grin returned to her face. "Again you misunderstand, I do not care about humans, more like I find them to be quite entertaining. They've been my main source of entertainment for millennia after all." She then turned to give a look to the fighters around Pan. "I've always enjoyed watching all the grief and desolation that their actions tend to bring, for we both know you humans need not the influence of my kind in order to bring about the most heinous acts of unspeakable cruelty. You're always fig-thing each other, bringing nothing but pain to your fellow man. The wars you have brought about, many for the most inane of reasons, and the death and suffering you have left in their wake. It always amazes me how quickly you are to justify your actions in order to commit mass murder. Your willingness to do evil has always been one of my favorite points as to why I like your kind so much." She began to pass her gaze through most of the figures in the room. "I know each and every one of your sins. When I lay my eyes upon you, all of them are revealed to me, nothing escapes my notice. I know what you have done. Every person you have hurt, every life you've ruined or taken, in some cases some more than others, the pain you have inflicted upon others for no other reason than just because you could, the suffering you've caused. All the people you had to step upon in order to fulfill your selfish desires. All the shameful acts you've done that have done nothing but to stain your soul in the eyes of God. And not only have you condemned yourselves to hell, but also condemned others to fall down with you because of your actions, dragging other people who were innocent to be devoured by the eternal flames because of your poisonous influence. Spreading ruin all around you as if it was a disease," she said with a terrible wicked smile. None of the gathered fighters spoke, their countenance grim. "And for that, know that all of your souls already belong to me." Even, at this she turned to look down at Kula and Cheekage, her eyes gleaming with a piercing red. "Those of the little ones, number," Diana exclaimed with nerve-wrecking horror, passing her arms around Kula and hugging her tight towards her. Kushanada too was very disturbed by that revelation and turned to look at her adopted daughter with terror. For the first time in a long time, feeling the paralyzing effects of dread through her body, and the effects of remorse at what she had done. "No, you can't do that. That cannot be. Kula is innocent. It was all my fault. It was because of me that she was forced to do horrible things. She was being controlled. It was not of her own volition. She hasn't done anything wrong." Diana all but screamed in despair at the content Daimokaicho, pleading for the little blonde she had begun to see as a daughter. Her eyes filling with tears that threatened to spill forth as her guilt threatened to crush her mind. Hild only chuckled at the despairing woman. "Oh, really? Then I guess that girl over there almost got herself killed by falling down the stairs," she said carefree as she pointed at Yui Sayama, the girl that Kula had fought during the matches against Yami and who was propped against a wall all bandaged up with great gauzes covering the wound on her stomach. Diana simply did not know how to respond to that at seeing the wretched state that the teenage apprentice was in. "That is the result of what you've taught her. No excuse, her soul has been stained by violence," Hild said before exploding in a fit of laughter. Diana could do nothing but break down in tears as she held Kula in her arms in distress, trying desperately to deny the words of the Daimokaicho that began to repeat over and over inside her head. Voices telling her that it was all her fault, that despite her best efforts, she had failed miserably to protect Kula in the end. Do not listen to her. Lind yelled, snapping everyone's attention towards her and breaking the distress of the moment. She just stared at the ruler of Niflheim with outright hatred in her eyes. You are truly a despicable being, Damakaicho. Does your cruelty and evilness know no bounds? Even now, you seek nothing but to spread misery with your words and make humans stray from the path of righteousness. As long as I can still stand, I will not allow you to condemn more innocents to hell. She declared with conviction, and she stood proudly in her 2 feet despite her injured condition. Hild wasn't fazed by the declaration of the blue-haired goddess. All it did was to make her the next focus of her attention. Oh, but don't you see, this is why I like humans. To bring about the eternal damnation of their souls, I didn't have to lift a single finger, they all brought it on themselves. Tee he, ha, 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 ha. She declared in a fit of laughter that echoed ominously in the room. Throughout it all, Pan simply remained quiet, her attention solely focused on Hild as she carefully took in every single of the mannerisms of the ruler of hell. Finally at length, she spoke. My God, you're an asshole. Most of Pan's followers turned to look at her with expressions of growing confusion on their faces. No, seriously, you are a fucking asshole. A goddamn jerk is what you are. Of all the reactions Hild could have expected from the alien, this was certainly not one of them, and it showed on her face. After all, not many dared to insult her so crassly to her face. Bold words that are coming out of your mouth for certain. Not many can boast to have uttered them in my presence and live to tell about it. She said with seemingly uncare, but one could see the dangerous glint in her eye. Pan, however, was not one for subtle hints. I don't fucking care, that doesn't change the fact that you are a motherfucking troll. Now, that got a reaction out of the Damakaicho. Hey, now those are heavy words that sting. How dare you call me a troll? She exclaimed in affront. She's been called many things over the millennia, but never has someone dared to call her a troll up front. Oh, you want explanations? Very well, let's see, Pan said as she began to think. First of all, fuck you. Seriously, fuck you for trying to scare my minions. She exclaimed, pointing at the Damakaicho with her finger. What's all this stupid shit about? You are all going to hell because of you sins. Rarg, your souls are mine. She said, faking a deep baritone in the last statement. The fact that someone was making fun of her, something that was incredibly rare, caused enough of an impression on the Damakaicho to leave her stunned for a few seconds, not knowing how to react to that. The same went for all the people that were watching. Pan bristled and waved a hand in front of her in dismissal. Bitch, please. As I had stated, my family has close relations with the Kais. I know pretty well that it requires some real effort in order to be sent to hell. My Grand Bardock once fell in combat and was dead for some time before we could revive him with the Dragon Balls, and he wasn't sent to hell. And you must remember that he is a man who single-handedly managed to conquer an entire galaxy practically on his own, killing countless of people and eradicating entire species in the process. So if he wasn't sent to hell for what he did, then I really doubt the soul of Kula will be damned just because she beat the crap out of Yui. So I call your bluff and name you a troll because of it, she declared, pointing a finger at the Damakaicho again. Everybody in the room took a moment to digest the words of the alien girl. It was Whip who finally spoke again. Why wasn't he sent to hell? If he is as terrible as you say, why wasn't he punished for his crimes? Don't tell me he was allowed into heaven. Because if he was, then I don't know what messed up system does the gods of the universe have to judge a person's soul. She deadpanned. Because redemption actually exists. Remember when I told you all that my people leave their lives as planet conquerors behind and change their ways? Well, my Gran was one of the firsts to accept this change, so he stopped killing people left and right and instead decided to join my grandfather, his son, and help him protect the planet where we live on. Just to clarify, is not the planet where we Saiyans hail from, but the planet where my grandfather grew up. As I had said, we Saiyans used to send our newborn to take over the planets of weak races, only that my grandfather, instead of eradicating the native species of the planet he had been sent, decided better to protect them once he was of age. which obviously put him at odds with the rest of my people, and eventually culminated in the abandonment of the old ways. Anyway, my grand decided to help my grandfather and defend the planet he called home and eventually learned to value life instead of just squashing it. Not that surprising in hindsight, since by the time our days as planet conquerors were at an end, my grand had grew tired of all the killing long before the change of politics came. He once told me that genocide tends to lose its appeal real fast and ends up becoming a pretty boring and tedious task. Pan stated with the most blasé expression ever. Whip was completely aghast by her lack of worry when talking about the extinction of entire species at the hands of her great-grandfather. That is a horrible thing to say. You know, it really worries me how indifferent you are towards things like mass murder or genocide, acting as if it wasn't much of a big deal. She exclaimed, giving Pan a frantic. The alien girl just shrugged in reply. Well, you have to remember my species is different than yours, not only in mentality or culture, but also in terms of power. You saw how almost this planet was destroyed during my fight with Lind, and that for me was nothing but a mere warm-up. She stated with a look. So try to see it from my grand perspective. After fighting against the most dangerous species this universe had to offer, defeating the most powerful warriors, taking and coming up victorious in the most suicidal of missions, he ended up becoming so powerful that taking over planets turned into a routine. Just launch an energy blast, kill all life on the surface, move to the next planet. Launch an energy blast, kill all life on the surface, move to the next planet. Launch an energy blast, kill all life on the surface, move to the next planet, and so on so forth. And that's how every single day turned out to be for him. There was simply no longer any challenge, nothing to look up for anymore. The people hearing her speak simply gave her a look after she finished with her explanation. You know, I really can understand what you are saying in an academic level. But that doesn't change the fact that it scares me shitless how ridiculously overpowered your race is. Whip spoke with frayed nerves. That really sounds boring. I hope that never happens to me now that I am serving and learning under you. I do enjoy quite very much my killing. It would be a big disappointment if I were to lose my taste for it in the pursuit of strength. Dr. Jackal mentioned in a casual tone, pulling out one of his scalpels and idly appraising and fiddling with it in front of his face. Oh, do not worry about that. You have a ridiculous long way to go before you hope to be able to face me in an equal ground. Despite my fight with Lind, I've yet to show my full power. And even if by some miracle you manage to defeat me, you still have to go against the elders of my family. Remember, I am the youngest, therefore, I am the weakest member of my family. Even if I have the talent to surpass my ancestors one day, I've yet to unlock my full potential. I do not have the skill or experience to hope beating them anytime soon. Pan explained truthfully. Dr. Jackal brought up a finger to his chin in thought, thinking about the implications of that statement. Just how much powerful your elders are compared to you? He asked curiously. Pan scratched the back of her neck as she ran calculations inside her head to give an accurate answer, the golden of her hair fading out as she returned back to normal. I really don't know. They tend to get some serious boosts in their power every now and then as a result of their constant single-minded training. They're many hundreds, maybe even thousands of times more powerful than me. All I know is that the difference between the power levels of my eldest relatives and mine is just like the difference that exists between all of you and me. In other words, abysmal. She said with a rather cheerful face. Remember, I'm the youngest, practically the baby of the family. Many of her followers paled at that thought, their minds unable to imagine individuals with such power. The notion was distressing to say the least. But not everybody was disturbed by the news. Dr. Jackal seemed delighted by them if the small smirk gracing his lips was any indication. That's a relief then. I would be pretty distressed if I didn't have anything to strive for. Foxy interrupted the conversation, wishing to get back to the previous unfinished subject, a small frown creasing her brow. That is all well and good, but let us return back to the part of how your great-grandfather managed to avoid being sent to hell, if only to ensure Diana's peace of mind. She said crisply, worried for the mental state of the only other human being in her life who she could honestly call a friend. Pan's eyes took a faraway gaze as she began to recall the events as they had been told to her. Well, this happened right after my grandfather died a second time in battle. You know the time I mentioned he remained dead for 7 years before coming back. I forgot to mention that my gran went to make him company pretty soon after that. Back then, my father was just a boy of 11 years old. He and the rest of my family, my grand-uncles and family friends had finished this battle against this pretty advanced cybernetic organism named Cell that had the ability to consume other organisms and add their power to his own. He could also regenerate any kind of wound as long as a single cell remained of his body. My grandfather died in the battle against him because the creature tried to blow itself up alongside the whole planet when it found itself overmatched. So my grandfather had to teleport with it to another planet, and then the explosion killed him and destroyed that other planet in the process. I'm assuming you're referring to that technique you posses to teleport to the places you've already been in an instant. I didn't know it was powerful enough to allow you to travel to another planet. Iori Yagami commented as he put a hand over the bang that covered the right side of his face before flicking his hair back. Well, the technique itself has no range limit for what I can tell. It all depends on the mastery that the user has over the technique. The only limit I know of would be that of your own sensory skills. I only know the basics of this technique, so I can only use it to travel between places I've already been or that fall within my sensory range. And my sensory range is only good for whatever goes inside the local solar system. Pan explained, mulling over the specifics. I've yet to teach this technique to you all, isn't it? Sorry about that. It's because I only have the minimum grasp over this technique myself, and we have to work over your key detection abilities before I can consider putting you all through the basics. Yeah, that's okay. Just move on with the story. Foxy prompted with a hint of impatience. Your grandfather sacrificed his life to defeat this cell creature, and then what happened? Pan pushed a strand of ebony black hair behind her ear as she continued with the story. Well, as it turns out, my grandfather's sacrifice was a bust. The explosion didn't manage to erase all traces of Cell from existence, so he regenerated and came back stronger. My father, after seeing that the death of my grandfather had been in vain, got pissed so much as to unlock his Super Saiyan second stage for the first time. And then he proceeded to beat the crap out of Cell before finally blasting him into oblivion with a Kamehameha, atomizing every single cell of Cell's body and killing the creature for good. She explained as succinctly as possible. The alien girl waved a hand in front of her in dismissal and moved on with the subject. Anyway, after Cell had been defeated, the rest of my family had barely any time to rest before the next threat came to pop its head around. Both my gran and uncle received a message that told them the Saiyan homeworld had been destroyed. Your planet was destroyed. You don't seem pretty worked up about it. Vice asked with a stumped expression. The alien girl just shrugged uncaringly. It was wished back later, so it doesn't matter. You can wish the dead back to life where you are from. To do so will require a great deal of magic for it to not interfere with the primal laws of the universe. The girl in the kimono assisting Koenma said. Botan, her brow furrowing a little in thought. That's the power of the Dragon Balls. 7 mystical spheres that when gathered can summon the ancient dragon Shenlong to grant any wish. Much better than the system that these goddesses have in place to grant wishes of their own. Pan replied as she absently pointed towards the Norns with her thumb. Botan simply nodded in acknowledgement. That explains it then. Dragons are one of the few creatures in the universe whose magic is powerful enough to bring the dead back to life without causing an imbalance on the spiritual world. Still, his power must be tremendous if he is able to restore entire planets back to life. The brunette said with a hint of awe. He is. There's almost no wish that Shenlong can't grant. Though, there are some very specific limitations to what kind of wishes is prohibited. Wishing for the death of another living being or forcing someone to fall in love with you against their will, even his ability to reassure CT the dead come with a fine print. He cannot bring back people that have died of natural means, old age and disease and such. But burying these named exceptions, anything else is fair play. Power, money, immortality itself can be yours should you so wish it. Pan explained with a carefree demeanor. I really don't see the point to all these wishes business. Dr. Jackal said with a dismissive air. There's nothing really that I would wish for that I couldn't attain myself, and immortality I already achieved it on my own. He shrugged nonchalantly. The rest of the gathered fighters just stared at him. Pan decided to simply get back to the topic at hand. Anyway, back to the story. The message told that the being that destroyed the planet seemed to have an axe to grind with the Saiyan royal family, so he was heading towards the world we live on to kill my uncle who is the prince of all Saiyans and the next heir to the throne and possibly destroy our planet too in the process. She explained such important fact as if she was talking about the weather. Your uncle is the next ruler of your species. When were you going to tell us that? Whip exclaimed rather startled. Does that mean you're royalty? Pan just clicked her teeth in dismissal of that statement. The hell you are talking about? Of course not. We are not blood related in the first place if that's what you mean. I call him uncle because he's always been around for most of my life and I even trained under him for a time. He's a friend of the family and has a lasting rivalry with my grandfather. For decades they've been training together and fighting each other to see who is the stronger of the two. They always end up tackling the world-ending threat in turn together. So yeah, he is a friend of the family and I call him uncle because he's been one of the important people in my life and I like him. She made such honest statement with such a nonchalant attitude, that the people around her couldn't help but look at her oddly. You say such things, so carefreely without any embarrassment. Nina mentioned with a frown, her weight being supported by Gaidar with one of her arms over his shoulders and a hand of him on her hip. Why should I be ashamed that I look up to the elders of my race? We Saiyans do not hesitate nor doubt about our choices or actions. We say what we feel and we do what we want, and we don't care what others may think about it. Pan retorted briskly, a hard stare aimed towards the expressionless assassin. Nina simply replied with a nod in acknowledgement. I understand. I meant no offense by that. She remained quiet after that. Who was this enemy that destroyed your species' homeworld and then threatened to destroy your planet? Iori asked, wishing to get back on topic. The legendary Super Saiyan, was Pan's simple answer. One of your own race destroyed your species' home planet. Somehow I'm not really surprised about that, so it was another Super Saiyan just like you. You know, with the hair turning golden and body bursting all up in energy. Whip asked as she made signals around her own hair to refer about Pan's physical changes when powering up. Not like me, no. Let me explain, we Saiyans do not have gods to whom we pray or worship to. Our spiritual beliefs are more centered around the adoration of our ancestors, especially to the one who is known as the precursor of our race, the legendary Super Saiyan. As the name implies, he was the first to attain the state of Super Saiyan in all of our recorded history, and for almost 100,000 years being the only one to do so. Hence he was known as the original Golden Warrior from legend. Before the legendary battle between my grandfather and great-grandfather on the planet Namek, no Saiyan had ever managed to achieve the Super Saiyan state, except in two marked exceptions that were foreseen by the legendary Super Saiyan himself. Pan explained to a rapted audience. Foreseen? How is that even possible? Was he able to see the future or what? Angel piped in for the first time in the entire conversation, a strange glint on her eyes. Actually yes, legend tells that the legendary Super Saiyan was able to predict future events through visions he got in his dreams. He prophesied that 2 times would a Saiyan be born with the power of the Super Saiyan, the result of a rare genetic condition that allows the individual to project an impressive amount of power from their bodies, but without the means to safely keep it under control. Those Saiyans born with this condition keep generating more and more energy without end, like opening a tap to let the water flow but not closing it again after washing your hands. Eventually, the sink overflows and water starts spilling into the floor, and if you keep letting the water running without closing the tap, it will end up flooding your house. That's exactly what happened with the first Super Saiyan that was predicted. His body kept generating energy until it was too much for him to hold on his own and he ended up blowing up in a gigantic explosion that destroyed our planet of origin, back during the time of the first Saiyan Empire. My race was forced to wander for 1,000 years throughout the stars until they found and settled a new planet to call home, which is our current homeworld and capital of our new star empire. Pan explained with a plain attitude, focusing solely in cold hard facts. So, I'm assuming this other Super Saiyan you mentioned must be the second one that was predicted. Your species must have been thrilled when they became aware of his existence. Foxy mentioned with dripping sarcasm, a hand pulling back to flick her long and vast ponytail. Well yes, they did try to kill him when he was just a baby when his vast and overwhelming reserves of power were discovered at birth. They were unable to do so and instead the king exiled both him and his father into deep space, away from our home galaxy. From what I've been told, both father and son spent decades wandering through the void with no other thing to do but to fuel their hatred for the royal family. Pan droned in a seemingly bored tone. It was ancient history for her after all, as it happened almost a decade before her time. I gather then that the destruction of your species' homeworld was an act of revenge for their banishment. Mature concluded, her hair covering the right side of her face flowing freely as she spoke. Indeed, the father of this newborn Super Saiyan declared a bloodbath against all the royal family, and as I had said, seeing how my uncle is the prince of our race. Well, that certainly put our planet under great danger. Pan explained carefreely. How powerful was this legendary Super Saiyan? Kushinada asked curiously, although no one could tell because of her cold, unexpressive voice. As usual, the main interest on her mind always focuses around strength. Pan pursed her lips and made a sour face before answering. He once shattered an entire galaxy by blowing up its core. Most of all the living things dwelling in there died as result. Now it's nothing but a graveyard, a terrible reminder of what uncontrolled power without a goal or direction can do. Her audience simply gaped in muted disbelief at that statement. Well, all except Hild, who simply scratched her chin as she mused over the information she had just heard. Ah, so that's what happened to that galaxy. I always wanted to know the name of the monster that could perform such a feat. It's hard for us goddesses and demonesses to get any kind of news and information from outside the Milky Way. That is an apt description. From the way I've heard my relatives talk about Brawly, he was truly a monster, a terrible and unstoppable force that destroyed anything standing in its path. Pan admitted with a nod. All my remaining male relatives alongside their companions and friends of the family faced him, and none of them were able to even scratch him. Brawly defeated them all. That was a total of almost 9 Saiyans, most of them veterans from our species' space piracy days, all of them able to reach the Super Saiyan state, plus their allies, and every single one of them got their ass kicked. She explained and let her words sink for a moment. Her audience could gape in astonishment at that revelation, their expressions clearly betraying their thoughts that ran along the lines of thinking expletives like, shit. As they began to realize the terrible power that this Brawly may have possessed. How did your family manage to defeat such a powerful opponent? Kushinada asked, intrigued. As I had said, it was my great-grandfather who in the end defeated Brawly. As my father was the only one back then who had been able to unlock the second stage of Super Saiyan, he was the only one left standing to face Brawly when all the rest had failed. But not even him was strong enough to defeat Brawly. The legendary Super Saiyan was about to kill my father, but in the last moment, my gran intervened. Getting in the way and receiving a blow that punched a hole straight through his chest. Most would have been dead by that point, but my gran remained standing on his feet despite his grievous wound. In a last-ditch effort, he asked for all the others to lend him whatever energy they had left, took it all upon himself, powered up beyond his limits and managed to unlock his own second stage of Super Saiyan, grabbed Brawly, flew all the way into space as the legendary Super Saiyan struck and punched at him trying to break his hold, and then when they were high above the orbit of our planet, he detonated all the energy he had gathered, creating a massive explosion strong enough to kill Brawly for good, giving his life in the process to attain such victory. Pan explained, listing every single action with her fingers. That sounds pretty noble from your great-grandfather part actually. To give his life in order to defeat such terrible opponent and save your father's life, and I'm fairly sure all other life in your planet too. Whip said, honestly impressed as she really hadn't expected this kind of selfless sacrifice after hearing how cruel and terrible the Saiyan race was. Pan just nodded as she continued with her explanation. And it is because of acts like that my gran managed to earn his redemption, even though it had never been his intention to do it so in the first place and avoided being sent to hell. So where was he sent then? If not hell then heaven? Whip asked once more, her face scrunched up in thought. Nope, neither. Seeing how he and my grandfather had both greatly helped the Kaio-sama of our sector and the Soul Office in the past and proved themselves a great aid in helping to keep the balance of the spirit world. My grandfathers were allowed to remain and train in there for the 7 years they were dead until their resurrection. Needless to say, they got quite strong in there by the time they were wished back to life thanks to the Dragon Balls. Pan said plainly. And that's when your grandfather Goku participated in the grand tournament of the afterlife and won the title of the strongest warrior in the universe. Skuld exclaimed with all the emotion and excitement only a child could imprint in their actions, making the youngest goddess look quite cute. Botan nodded in agreement with a happy face. Indeed, Son Goku is a very well-known and respected individual in the spiritual world. He and his family are held in the highest of esteem and gain the greatest of honors. They have proved to be invaluable allies during times of crisis. The Blue Net stated with certainty. Pan acknowledged that statement. And it is because of my family's close ties with the spiritual world that I know exactly how the process to pass judgment is made. She then pointed a finger towards Hild. That's why I knew from the moment she opened her mouth that she was just trolling all of you. Do not believe anything that she said. It's not even up to her to decide who goes to hell or who doesn't. All that held to that accusation was cross her arms and huff. Well, I'm the ruler of hell if you remember. I'm supposed to be evil. Annoying and tormenting people are part of my job description, so sue me. Explain to us then, how are the souls of the dead being judged? Foxy asked, ignoring completely the little tantrum of the Damakaicho. She was trying her best not to be insulting, but still her voice ended coming out a little testy despite her best efforts to keep it even. She really cared about her friend Diana, and anything that could dissuade the fears she had over their actions having a hand in condemning Kula's soul to hell would certainly be a godsend. Pan clicked her teeth, seemingly bored. That is the job of the Soul Office. They are in charge of keeping in record all the actions made by every single soul in the universe and carry out with their individual trials once they pass away to decide what fate would await them in the afterlife. Individual trials. You mean they judge every single soul one by one according as to when they arrive? That sounds like it would take a long time to do, not mention how tedious must it be. Whip remarked with a small grimace, as all this bussiness seemed incredibly monotonous to her. Botan took up to answer in this part. It is a pretty arduous work, I must admit. She acknowledged with a shrug. Luckily, most of the recording of mortal actions is automatic. Enchanted pens are assigned to the soul signatures of individual mortals and each one writes on paper every single action that person takes. It is the filing and summarizing of such long records into succinct reports to be used during each trial that is a pain. But yes, having to judge each singular soul at a time makes for very long lines of souls waiting for their turn. Even though our records help to make expeditive trials that last only mere minutes, there are still lines that are several miles long every day. Foxy seemed thoughtful for a moment before formulating another question. Who is the judge in charge of proceeding over these trials? Pan took over answering questions again. The one in charge of passing judgment over the souls of mortals is King Yema. He is a giant horned ogre who sits on a massive desk where he reads the reports and hears the pleas of each soul. He then has to decide what fate would befall to the person on trial by putting his seal on their applications to enter either heaven to hell, or send their souls to be reincarnated. But that is just in the main soul office I'm familiar with, since I was told only a single office exists in the entire universe in charge of screening and seeing over the souls of the dead. So I'm really surprised to know that another soul office exists on this galaxy. She said as she glanced towards Botan. The Blue Net girl answered to the unspoken question with calmness. Well, there are smaller satellite offices spread throughout the universe to help lessening the burden upon the main office. Otherwise, no matter how big or capable the main office can be, it would be utterly impossible for it to screen through all the souls of the deceased from the entire universe. The local office where I work is just in charge of overseeing the Milky Way and the neighboring galaxies that can be found spread throughout the edge of the Virgos cluster. The person in charge of passing judgment upon mortal souls in this office is King Yema's younger brother, King Enma, father of Lord Koenma. She stated as she motioned towards the small toddler that was still speaking with Kami-sama through Vice's cell phone. Pan brought a finger to her chin in thought as she pondered over the explanation given by Botan. Well, I suppose that makes sense then. My galaxy is part of the main concentration of galaxies in the center of the Virgos cluster, which is under the jurisdiction of the main office, so it's no wonder I hadn't heard about this other satellite offices before. Anyway, she said as she turned back to her underlings. As you can see, I am pretty aware of how things truly work in the afterlife. So don't you worry your pretty little heads, your souls are safe from being condemned to hell. She said pretty cheerfully. Still, Whip couldn't help but feel a little apprehensive. If we are not in danger of being sent to hell, then what is most likely to happen to our souls? She asked with a hint of nervousness, as she is pretty aware of the sins she has committed, her hands stained with the blood of others even if that had not been her intention in the first place. It was Botan who answered her question. As Pan said, it requires some real effort in order to be sent to hell, but the same is true for heaven. Most souls do not manage to be qualified for either heaven or hell, as they do not gather the requisites necessary to be sent to one or the other. The great majority of mortals are not pure enough of either thought or action to be granted entrance into heaven because they usually let themselves be driven by their selfish desires. Most people simply do not show an ounce of selflessness or concern for their peers and would rather try to manipulate or use them to better their own position. Such things are not tolerated in heaven, but they are also not enough reason to send someone to hell. Only the most dark, cruel, nasty and evil of souls are sent in there, which also leaves a great deal of the population unqualified to be sentenced to that place despite whatever sins they may have committed in life. As it is, a great majority of the souls that arrive in the afterlife go instead through the cycle of reincarnation and return to the mortal world to have a chance at a new life with all their memories and recollections of past incarnations erased so as to make sure they have another chance to live without being tied or prone to make the same mistakes of past lives. As it is, hell itself was originally created to help cleansing the sins of a soul to ensure it can reincarnate once more without anything staining its essence. Many souls that are sent to hell go there for this reason. They do their time as to be cleansed of their sins and are thus able to reincarnate and live again as a new being. As far as I know, only the souls of those that can be labeled truly evil beyond any redemption get to have a permanent stay in hell. That, or have a contract with a demon where they agreed to sell their souls in exchange for favors. She said this last part as she glanced uneasily towards Hild. The apparent 13-year-old girl just chuckled mirthfully. Well, I am the Damakaicho, am I not? Of course I would encourage my minions to forge pacts and contracts with mortals to trick them into condemning their souls into eternal torment for just some measure of power in the human world. Do not act surprised, you should really have expected this sort of things from me. She said with an amused stare and a cheeky grin. Pan didn't care about that and addressed Whip personally. Well, that's the gist of it, not that it should have been a concern to any of you in the first place. With the connections my family has with the afterlife, one word from me would have gone a long way to make sure any of you avoided from ever stepping into hell. Damn, I can even make you all be exempt from the cycle of reincarnation and allow your souls to dwell in the spirit world after death so that you may train in there and learn from the strongest warriors the universe has ever had over the ages. She said in an almost disdainful tone. Heck, because how well known my family is and how much we have helped the spirit world. The simple fact of you hanging around me and being an associate of mine is enough to give all of you a lot of kudos in the afterlife. She turned to look back at Koenma who was still on the phone. Isn't that right, Shorty? She asked to the toddler as he approached towards her, finally finishing his conversation with Kami-sama and closing the cell phone. Don't call me Shorty, it's insulting, Koenma exclaimed a little miffed. He gave back the cell phone to the alien girl. Anyway, I've finished speaking with Kami-sama and he agreed not to take Lin's angels away from her. However, that means you're going to be responsible for her as she fulfills her sentence here on Earth with her entire powers sealed. So you'll have to make sure that she doesn't start using her angels to hack the Yggdrasil and lift the seal on her power by drawing energy from the world's supercomputer. The small toddler said, the pacifier in his mouth wiggling and bobbing with every word he uttered. Unless, of course, some extenuating circumstance happens that makes the use of Lin's powers absolutely necessary. But we'll leave that to your discretion. Just bear in mind that this exile to Earth is to make sure to teach Lin some humility and remind her why she is not to use her powers so carelessly while on the human world. But for all intents and purposes, Lind will be under your care from now on. Well, I don't see anything wrong with what you're saying, so I suppose I can agree to those terms. Pan replied with laid-back attitude. I'm surprised the Kami-sama of this planet agreed to this arrangement after being so adamant to make sure Lind paid steeply for going against his so-called rules. She said with obvious sarcasm in the end as she made air quotes with her fingers. Well, you must remember that we also managed to reach an agreement with the forces of hell beforehand to avoid the possibility of war between gods and demons altogether. After telling him of this development, Kami-sama was much more agreeable to accept the terms I gave to him. The small child replied, his high-pitched voice becoming pronounced at moments. Pan eyed the avatar of Hild from the corners of her eyes. It was more than clear that she had her suspicions about the ruler of Hell's motives. That is all well and good, but I've yet to know what she's getting out of all this, she said as she motioned toward Hild with a movement from her head. She then brought her attention back towards Koenma, a thoughtful frown marrying her features. How did you know there was going to be trouble between Kami-sama and me over Lind in the first place? It's only been a couple of hours since my battle with her ended. It seems incredibly odd to me how quickly you responded to this situation, and already you have managed to avert a potentially disastrous war for this planet in a relatively short amount of time. The small child simply shrugged non-committally before replying. Well, to tell the truth, we had already some contingencies prepared in advance in case a situation like this could arise, ever since you announced yourself to the world as an alien last week. The first thing I did when I saw your broadcast where you revealed your status as an alien was to call my uncle Yema and tell him you were here. He advised me that I should simply leave you to your devices, as since you are granddaughter of Son Goku, it is not very probable that you'll try to do anything that would threaten the safety of this world, and told me that whatever situation may arise in the mortal world, you're more than capable of dealing with it. He also told me you could be a powerful ally to rely on if a crisis threatening the stability of the spiritual world in this sector of the universe were to appear. With that in mind, I started to think in the best way to approach you and create plans in case you had a confrontation with the local deities of this world. Pan just raised an eyebrow after that explanation. So you're doing all this to get on my good graces and call on my help when trouble appears on the spiritual world? Well, I suppose I can agree to do that. My grandfather does tend to lend a hand to the Kaio-sama of our galaxy and to King Yema from time to time. She mused for a moment before bringing her sights down to the small toddler. Just make sure to give me some time to finish getting settled myself in this planet before you start giving me orders. I still haven't installed most of my things here on my new headquarters after all. Koenma replied with a nod. All right, I can do that. The alien girl acknowledged that answer. Very well, so that's your and Kami-sama's terms. That only leaves the Daimokaicho, she said as she glanced at Hild once more. The ruler of Hell just grinned mischievously as she approached to speak with the alien girl. Indeed, that's true. Now it's my turn to tell you what my price to pay is to avoid war, she said with delight. Her seemingly pleased expression made everybody in the room to be immediately suspicious of her motives. Pan didn't have the patience for games, so she asked the Daimokaicho up front. Well, what is it then? What do you want that will make sure you don't decide to start attacking the forces of heaven and invading the human world? She said rather briskly. The ruler of Hell wasn't in the least put off by the Saiyan teen's attitude. Oh, it's actually pretty simple, nothing too complicated in reality. Since you're going to be hosting one of Kami-sama's goddesses under your roof, it is only fair we demons should also have one of our own as your guest for equality's sake, she said as she kept her Cheshire smile on her face. Pan narrowed her eyes in suspicion. That is all. Why exactly do you want one of your minions to be among my ranks? Is it to spy on me? Or to try to corrupt me under your influence? She accused with a great deal of venom dripping from her voice. Hild simply scoffed at her accusations. Please, don't be so dramatic. This entire business does not completely revolve around you. Whether you accept or not to host one of my minions, either way, a demoness will have to remain here on Earth for the duration of Lin's punishment. That is so to make sure she acts as the exact opposite to the goddess's influence and preserves the balance here on Earth. That is one of the rules imposed by the doublet system. So better to have one of my demonettes close to you to keep an eye on her. rather than having her running around the place unsupervised, don't you think? Also, I'm kind of fond of the agent that I chose for this role, so I really would prefer for her to have a place where she can live during her stay on Earth rather than forcing her to find a place of her own. The Daimokaicho admitted, trying to shed a little bit more light over her motives for Pan to understand. The Daimokaicho motioned with her arm towards the blonde woman close to her. Take Mara here as an example. She is forced to remain here on Earth as long as the contract that Belldandy's has with Kaiki that is keeping her here in the human world is in effect. So no hope for her to return to Niflheim until Belldandy returns first to heaven. The doublet system is very strict about keeping balance on all things, so for each goddess that may be at any given time on Earth, a demoness must also be present to act as her counterbalance. There is simply no way to go around this. The alien girl frowned in response at hearing that declaration. So you're asking me to take care of your minion the same way I've accepted to take care of Lynn for balance's sake. That's all that you're asking. You don't have any hidden motives under all this. You won't try to find a way to manipulate my actions, do your bidding? She asked pointedly, as she knows individuals like Hild always have secret agendas. The Daimokaicho just kept grinning. She approached Pan and caressed the alien girl's cheek, tracing tenderly the lines of her jaw. I was being truthful when I said I had really enjoyed the little show you did and transmitted through TV. I have no need to try to influence or control your actions, for they already please me greatly. I can't wait to see what else will you do, how much trouble will you stir up. Your presence here already has shaken the status quo of this world, and I for one I'm reveling in all the chaos left in your wake. If you really want the truth, the main reason I want one of my minions around you is so she can call me when you're about to do something interesting, so I can have all the time in the world to sit on my throne and turn on the TV at my leisure. She admitted with the more cheeky and unashamed grin ever. Pan really didn't have words to respond to that. In the end all she could do was let out a tired sigh. I really don't care at all about your politics, whatever rules you have or this so-called doublet system you have in place, that from what I can gather, is there to make sure both sides are always in a roughly equal amount of strength to match each other, but fine. If accepting having one of your minions tailing me around would mean putting an end to all this mess already before I get fed up and end up blowing all the damn planet, sigh, then I guess I'll accept, Pan said as she brought a hand to her brow and made pressure with her fingers in an effort to relieve her mental weariness that was just a thought short of a headache, a hint of tired resignation in her voice. Hild simply beamed even more at that answer. Splendid. I'll give her a call and summon her up in a jiffy. I'm pretty sure she'll be ecstatic to know she'll have the chance to visit Earth and get away from demon politics for a while. At hearing that the blonde demon is standing at the side of the Daimokaicho, Mara couldn't suppress down a snort. Of course you have to choose her. Of all the demons in our ranks you had to choose one who actually would like to spend time around humans for an indeterminate tenure. Ah, instead I have to remain stuck here in this mudball full of savages until Belldandy gets bored of her boy toy. Why my life has to be so unfair. The blonde demoness complained dejectedly. Pan, despite not having the best of trusts about Hild, didn't let her misgivings to extend to her minions. She turned towards Mara with a look that said that she shared the same feelings. I understand what you mean. Mara looked down towards the alien girl with mild surprise at being addressed. She squinted her eyes and scrutinized the Saiyantine, trying to discern what her angle may be. Being a demoness meant she was naturally suspicious of other people's motives. Yes, I suppose you do, she finally conceded after a moment. The Daimokaicho dismissed her underling's complaints with a wave of her hand. Please Mara, stop being so melodramatic. Living among humans is not so bad, and the fact you haven't been able to return to Niflheim lies solely in your inability to deal with a single goody two-shoes goddess. Mara shut up at the order of the Daimokaicho, as she knew how terrifying her power was, but couldn't refrain a bit of resentment from showing in her eyes. Pan interrupted the tense moment between boss and minion with her USAL brusque and tactless attitude. Whatever. As long as whatever minion you sent to me doesn't get in the way, I really don't care if it tails me or not. Just make sure to fulfill your word and keep your forces from attacking either heaven or earth. I don't want to hear that demons or monsters are attacking humans, because if I do, then I'm going to show the reason why countless of species have fallen against us Saiyans. she stated in a low even tone, not as a threat, but as a promise. Now that is a problem right there. Hild pointed out with particular emphasis on the word that. Do you know how many demons, devils, Mazokas and yokais serve under me? It is practically impossible for me to keep track of the movements of individual underlings all the time. All I can do is give the orders that no attempt to incite a war with heaven should be made and that everybody should stay clear from the humans and gods. That doesn't mean there would not be those who don't agree with my orders and decide to take matters on their hands and stir up troubles of their own, especially among the yokai ranks. How so? Pan asked curiously. I assume that you hold the position as ruler of hell because you are the most powerful demon that exists, so it would be easy to say that those that serve under you do so because they are afraid of your power. Indeed, that's true. I am the most powerful demon in existence. None other can match my power except for Kami-sama himself. Hild declared as she stood straighter and haughtily. But that doesn't mean that every single one of my minions will not try to go against my orders if they have the chance, despite knowing how terrible a thing is to wake my ire. This is the disadvantage of ruling over several different species. Some of them will be nothing more than prideful fools that would try to do something incredibly stupid despite what common sense would tell. Allow me to explain, the Daimokaicho said, her hand moving in a lazy elegant gesture to call for the attention on everybody in the room. I as the Daimokaicho rule over the demons and devils, who are practically the same species and my kin. Devil being the name we use for our young, the junior demons in training if you wish. The Japanese likes to call my species in general Akuma in case you want to know. Anyway, my kin will follow all orders given to me by the letter. Usually, the young of my species are curious and mischievous by nature, not for nothing we named them little devils. If you were to stumble with one of your young running amok and tormenting the humans, please be patient, whatever scheme they may be running is normally harmless in nature. Devils are known more for being pranksters and annoying little gits. They can be a menace, but more of the kind that is a pain in the ass rather than a threat against humankind. Mazokas and yokais, however, are another story. They are not my kin, and unlike us demons and devils who origin and live in Niflheim, they origin from the hellish dimension of Makai. They came to be under my rule through conquest, as I personally in ages past defeated their leaders and subjugated both of their races after they tried to interfere in my species' business and tried to attack us. Pan had to comment in that point. Just like my race used to do when conquering over other species. The alien girl said in a tone that seemed disturbingly cheerful for most of the lowly humans that were listening. Hild conceded her point. Pretty much, yeah. Anyhow, regarding the Mazokas, most of them will follow my orders too since they follow the rule of the strongest must lead, and that's me. Well, they follow their leaders but they were gracious enough to accept my rule after I defeated them and conquered their species. But this is only true for the strongest classes of Mazokas, the A and S classes who usually prefer to stay in Makai all the time and care nothing for wanting to get involved with the human world. Low-level Mazokas, however, are incredibly envious beings who are constantly jealous and resentful of those stronger than them, so they constantly try to enter into the human world to feed on the humans and gain more power in turn. Those I don't care, they are a constant chink on my shoulder, so feel free to deal with them as you like if you ever stumble upon them. And finally, the yokais, most of them are annoying little shits to tell the truth. They used to be slaves to the Mazoku, but despite of being the weakest of all the races under my rule, they are the ones with the biggest egos. Because there are still many yokai who resent my rule, expect some of them to try to act against my orders out of spite. Despite the fact that I'm much more powerful than what the strongest members of their species ever were and I could destroy their entire race with little effort if they ever dared to piss me off. Most yokais are arrogant idiots who believe themselves superior to us demons even though the weakest of our youngest is powerful enough to kill practically all of their yokai's clans with these. They think they know better than me and are entitled to ignore or go against my wishes behind my back whenever it suits them. It is for this reason that I and my subordinates have to constantly make examples out of them, and why I had to install a permanent presence in Makai to rule and oversee over the yokai. Which basically makes it so that there are two governing hierarchies in that dimension, mine and the Mazokas, since the little twerps don't want to follow the orders of anyone but their own. So yeah, I can assure you they will try to cause trouble after I give the order of leaving the gods and humans alone, since they are by nature a prideful bunch to a fault and will not take it well that they have to stay clear from a race that they consider inferior to them. Yokais have always considered humans little more than vermin. So yeah, there will be trouble. But feel free to kick the asses of those morons if you feel like. The punishment for going against my wishes is either death or an eternity of suffering in hell, so I really would not bat an eyelash if you suddenly start mowing their numbers down. My ex-husband knows they are a source of great stress to me. The Daimokaicho said with a vexed expression. For the first time since her arrival, she dropped her playful mood, which gave credence to her claims. The alien girl mused over the information that the ruler of hell had given her, trying to discern if the Daimokaicho was being truthful. Sounds reasonable, she spoke at length. That is, if yokais are truly as unruly as you depict them. Forgive me if I'm not entirely trustful about your word. I personally have never truly have any kind of contact with the yokais. My gran is the one who knows about them, though he has never said something particular remarkable about them. Only that some, very rare, times they are hired to deal with their presence on the worlds where they sometimes appear, but that depends more of a specific clan in question. The most peaceful or shrew of the Yukai clans have had trade relationships with my kind in the past. Though the appearance of yokais in other planets is sporadical at best, yomas are a more common threat that pops up among the stars. They are like a plague and my kind has time and again acted as pests exterminators to deal with them. Oddly enough, relationships between Saiyans and Mazoku have always been rather cordial in the past since both of our species respect only strength, so there's always been ground for understanding. Pan said with a furrowed brow as she tried to remember the lessons given to her by her great-grandfather. Well, that's true. Not all yokais are bad, some of them are peaceful or prefer to be left alone and live in isolationism. But it is the more radical and violent of clans that I'm speaking of. Since I rule two over their entire race, that means I have to deal with both the good and the bad. And it is the bad what I deal with more frequently, which I suppose is the reason why my opinion of their entire race has been soured. Hild admitted, bringing a finger to her chin in thought. Pan nodded at that before speaking again. Understandable, tell more about these hierarchies that are in place in Makai. Hild just shrugged in a lazy manner. Sure I guess, but what reason you may have to want to know how I run things in that place. Curiosity mostly. But it would also be wise to know all that I can about the yokais and Mazoku in case I have to deal with them. Knowing the political climate in their dimension would a good place to start as any. Pan said, in a calm unpreoccupied demeanor. Hild accepted that answer and began with the explanation. Alright, if that's what you want, let's see. Makai as a whole is under the dominion of the great Daimao Beelzebub. He is my voice and will in that dimension. Though do not get fooled. The title may sound important and impressive but the reality is that the Daimao is a bumbling idiot. A lazy dunderhead that spends most of his time playing games rather than ruling and keeping an eye on Makai on my stead. You may wonder why then did I put such a useless person in such an important position of power. And that is because as I had said, yokais are much weaker than us demons, and despite of his non-existent work ethic, Daimao Beelzebub is one of my strongest lieutenants. So he is there simply to act as a sort of Damocles that would bring down the pain to the yokais if they try to rebel or misbehave. The fake child said in seemingly bored tone. So he is only there as a figurehead then. Pan reasoned. The Daimokaicho confirmed that observation. Overall, yes, you could say so. Anyway, moving on. Underneath the Daimao there are four great Maos that answer directly to him, the Yondai Mao. They are the ones that handle the day-to-day affairs in Makai and make sure that my orders are being followed in their respective territories. So in short, they are the true rulers appointed to Makai that keep an eye on things for me. Their names are Lucifer, Mephisto, Leviathan, and Asmodeus. And that's pretty much how the hierarchy I implemented is structured. The Maos have done a good job in overseeing the Mazoku and yokais for me and carrying on with my will ever since I subjugated them many millennia ago. It's a very good system if I say so myself, hasn't failed me once in all this time. Hild mused half in thought, more to herself than to those that were listening. What about the Mazoku leaders? You said their rulers are still around since they bent the knee and accepted to serve you after you defeated them. Pan pointed out. Hild nodded. Indeed, well, more or less. Before I conquered them, the Mazoku used to be ruled by 3 great kings. Satan, who's been missing for centuries, no one knows what happened to him. Belial from Clan Ainsland, the only Mazoku who has attained the rank of S+ class and descendant of the original ruler of all Makai in ancient times, Ziruru Ainsland. Belial sadly passed away centuries ago. He was a wise and noble leader and I really liked him very much. His death certainly hit us all demons hard. And finally, Ryzen, who is on his way to make company to Belial. You mean he is dying? How so? Is he ill or something? Pan asked curiously, finding the topic about the hierarchies of Makai pretty interesting. Hild chuckled at her question, smiling to her insides. In a manner of speaking, Ryzen once found himself wounded and stranded in the human world. There he was tended back to health by a human woman whom he later fell in love and had a son with. He eventually had to leave her and return to Makai, but not before he vowed to her that he would never again eat humans, which are by the way the main source of nourishment for the Mazoku. The Daimokaicho explained to a pale audience that was distraught to discover that they were nothing more than food for the Mazoku. Well, except Pan and the most merciless of her followers, whose only reaction to this information was a small furrow of the brow. Hild ignored these reactions and continued with her explanation. She died later, of course, as all humans do with age, but he never forgot the promise he made to her and has been true to his word even to this day. So he has been slowly starving to death for centuries, a slow, painful and ignominious demise for someone who once upon a time was considered the most powerful of the S-class Mazoku. Pan, against all odds, was shocked at what she had just heard. Although not that surprising in hindsight, despite the fact that there were not many things that could impress a Saiyan, to willingly starve yourself to death was something that a Saiyan mind simply couldn't cope with for more than obvious reasons. He hasn't eaten anything on all that time. Why would he do something like that? Did he love that woman so much that the notion of dying of hunger didn't faze him, or what? She exclaimed, rather taken aback. Her minions had to comment on her unusual, unexpected reaction. You seem rather surprised of this Ryzen willingly starving himself to death. Whip pointed out plainly. Pan snapped at her briskly. Of course I'm surprised. You have seen the way I eat, haven't you? You know how much food I need to consume on every meal in order to keep up my strength. For us Saiyans, the thought that someone would willingly starve himself to death is incomprehensible. She said with a look on her face that could be considered as distressed. Whip, remembering the horror shows that take place every time Pan eats a meal, quickly understood why the short alien girl looked startled at the idea of self-starvation. Oh yeah, Kushinada thought prudent to speak to get the conversation back on tracks. You sound as if you held this man Ryzen in high regard, Hild Dono. She said courteously in her usual emotionless voice. She knows how to properly address someone more powerful than her after all, her belief of only respect and acknowledged strength and all that. Hild acknowledged the words of the century-old Grandmaster. Yes, I suppose so. Ryzen was once one of the most powerful Mazoku ever, only Belial being more powerful than him. At the peak of his strength he was able to go toe-to-toe against a second-class demoness and battle a first-class for hours on end. I admit, once upon a time, I entertained the idea of making him my consort. He was the most powerful male around and wasn't bad on the eyes either. He was wild and handsome in a rough-looking way, and had this kind of primal animal attraction to him. It was nice to have him around. The Daimokaicho said as her stare became distant and a saucy smile graced her lips. Behind her, Mara was nodding in agreement. I do not need to be hearing this kind of things from you, Hild. I really don't wish to know anything about your sex life, said a horrified Erd as she brought her hands to cover her ears and shook her head sideways in denial. The notion of hearing about the men that her own mother decided to bring to her bed was distressing to her, to say the least. The Daimokaicho simply waved her daughter off. Oh, please, I didn't peck you for a prude, my dear Erd-chan. Please, stop overreacting. We both know you've danced the horizontal mambo many times yourself. I am very well aware of that old tryst of yours with that little godling. Troubadour his name was, wasn't it? the ruler of hell commented in passing as she pretended to have trouble in her recollection. The white-haired goddess tossed a fulminant glare to her progenitor that seemed strong enough to melt steel. Shut up, Hild. I don't have to speak about my relationships with you, and I certainly don't want to hear anything about yours. Pan interjected with all the subtlety of a bull in a china shop. Anyway, this Ryzen fellow, I guess you didn't manage to hook up with him in the end. Hild brought her attention back to the alien girl and glanced at her briefly, knowing exactly what she was trying to do, an elegant eyebrow rising in curiosity. She didn't mind in the end and simply shrugged. No, sadly, as I had said, he has remained faithful to the woman he loved even after centuries since her demise. So he never showed any interest to my advances. Not that I blame him. To show such loyalty to his beloved is nothing short of commendable. Even we demons are not so heartless as to not acknowledge a love like his. The Daimokaicho then let out a mirthless chuckle. The funny part of all this is, if Ryzen had never decided to go through his self-imposed starvation, he would have been the most powerful S-class Mazoku around and would have been able to become the sole ruler of all of Makai, as there would be no one else able to challenge him. If that had happened, I would have never found myself in the need to impose a second ruling body, since he would have handled the yokai matter decisively on his own, as his methods are more vicious and merciless than mine. He would have never tolerated any kind of dissidence or disobedience from the yokais. But as it is, with his body in such a weakened state, Ryzen was unable to impose his will upon the rest of Makai, which gave way for rivals to rise and challenge his rule. Oddly enough, this has caused for the Mazoku loyalties to be divided between three kings once more. Ryzen and his two contenders, but with them not tolerating any kind of opposition to their rule and their armies fighting against each other regularly. Well, things are pretty hectic in Demon World right now, so it's hard even for my overseers to keep things under control. I see, Pan commented, mulling over this information. Certainly you seem to have much in your plate with how things seem to be in Makai right now. Very well, since you've shown not have any kind of displeasure of me handling any rogue Mazoku or yokai on my own, I suppose I can agree with your conditions. Just remember not to try anything that may lead to a war. Any kind of threat to this world directly caused by you while I'm stranded in here would force me to retaliate by going to your demonic dimensions personally and blow everything to bits. She said with a straight face in a matter-of-fact tone. Hild's answer was simply laugh heartily. I would certainly look forward to it. It would be a nice change of pace of the usual boring and droll routine. Just remember, little Saiyan, that me and my forces are not in the least the only things that may threaten the continual existence of this world. In the end, we demons are simply another part of the natural balance and order of this planet, compared with the rest of the threats out there that are waiting for their chance to come out and play. I and my minions seem tame in comparison. There are other things prowling in the night, forces outside my influence or control. Spirits and specters of the dead, magical beasts and creatures, yomas, fiends, onas, genmas, demi-humans and other creatures from the beyond, and that's not taking into account the monsters created by the planet itself. The Daimokaicho let out an amused chuckle. You know, I'm really looking forward to see how you will deal with all these menaces that tend to threaten this world regularly. It certainly promises to be highly entertaining to watch. I barely find it in myself to contain my excitement. Pan did not bother to reply to Hild's comments. She was more concerned about these new revelations that were brought to her attention. Certainly, she hadn't expected for this unremarkable little mudball to be saturated by those many troubles. She had the distinct suspicion it would be up to her to address all this crap whether she liked it or not. Well, better no use worrying about it now. She would deal with those issues as they appear, one at a time. It would certainly give her something to do and keep herself busy while she's in this planet. Maybe something interesting could come out of them. Out loud she spoke. Very well, all that sounds nice and good, but it really has no direct impact to the issue at hand. But fine, I can see your point. As long you're not directly involved in whatever supernatural threat that pops up trying to destroy this planet, I'll try nothing against you and yours or attempt to interfere with your business. Is that a satisfactory enough agreement? She said, raising her arm and offering her hand to the Daimokaicho. The Daimokaicho's face lit up and her smile beamed even more. Yes, it is, we have a deal then. she declared as she took hold of Pan's appendage and gave it a firm handshake. Now, if you excuse me, I have a minion to summon, she said as she stepped back and walked towards a corner of the room to bring forth the agent that would be under Pan's care. The alien girl made no comment and simply watched as the Daimokaicho used her magic to open a portal in the floor of the room, and from it a figure began to rise and make active presence. The figure was certainly feminine, as the shapely curves of her gorgeous body could attest to. A long smooth and lustrous mane of emerald hair cascaded from her head all the way down her back, two small batwings protruding from the top of her skull, a second set of bigger wings as tall as her coming from her back. Vibrant and alluring emerald eyes, white milky soft skin, pert sensual lips, were but a few of her attractive features. The woman was dressed in a tight outfit of purple and black colors, bat symbols covering the entire length of the purple tights covering her fabulous legs. The part of her outfit covering her midriff looked Kika a strange combination between a black leather one-piece and a stylized low-cut corset that helped to display her prominent assets, as it only covered the lower part of her breasts, exposing a great deal of the upper part, and left her entire shoulders bare except for a thin feathered fabric that circled them, and her back exposed all the way down to the base of her spine, not that it was that noticeable with her hair blocking the view. The entire assemble was made in such a way as to draw the attention of any onlooker down to her impressive cleavage. There was also a small cut in her outfit in the shape of a heart just beneath her breasts on the space between her chest and belly button, leaving even more white creamy skin exposed. Long purple silk-like fingerless gloves that covered her all the way up to her forearms and large V-cut high-heeled black leather elegant boots that reached her calves, closed the outfit. All in all, the woman oozed lust and sensuality from every pore of her body. The men in the group suddenly found themselves struggling to keep their composure. The level of sexiness that the woman possessed was so high to the point of being intimidating. Powerful and experienced masters of combat suddenly found themselves feeling as nervous and inexperienced 14-year-old teenagers. The woman introduced herself, speaking with a distinct noble Scottish accent. "Hello there. Name's Morrigan Love," she said in such a smooth and sensual voice that even the female fighters felt something shudder inside them at hearing it. Trough it all, the Daimokaicho was simply smirking with that Cheshire smile of hers. "Allow me to introduce you to Morrigan from Clan Ainsland, a succubus and some kind of surrogate daughter for me. She will be my agent assigned to accompany you for the duration of Lynn's stay on Earth," she said as she motioned towards the sensual emerald woman with one arm. Succubus, well, that explained her looks. Taking into consideration Morrigan's appearance and everybody's reaction to her presence, the alien girl turned towards the Daimokaicho with a flat look. "You did this on purpose. You knew from the very beginning this would happen." She couldn't stop herself from face-palming. "Ack, now I understand why you said that your race is known as a pain in the ass." Dr. Jackal, who was seemingly immune to the chaos around him, voiced a question. "Clan Ainsland, you say? Is our new companion related in some way to this former demon king, Belial? You spoke of my esteemed Daimokaicho," he said in his usual polite manner. Hild raised a finger and pointed it at him as she kept smiling. "You I like, you have manners and know how to address other people unlike some," she said as she gave Erd a glance from the corner of her eye. The bronze-skinned goddess simply bristled and flipped her own mother off with a rude gesture. Hild was unimpressed. "But yes, you guessed right. Morrigan here is the adopted daughter of Belial, his only acknowledged successor and thus sole heir to the territories of the former demon king. That is how I met her actually, since her father wanted me to teach and instruct her in the important aspects of demonkind. After all, he wanted her to be a proper demoness just like me. I was flattered, and of course I accepted. It's been a pleasure teaching her," she said as she floated a bit up and passed an arm over Morrigan's shoulder in a one-armed hug, the succubus returning the gesture. That info caused the savviest among Pan's followers to frown, as they could clearly see the entire political migraine that could come their way. If she is the heir of Belial, wouldn't that make her a top contender for the rule of Makai, and as such, a serious threat for Ryzen and his rivals? Foxy asked pointedly. It was Morrigan herself who answered that question. "Technically, that's true, but I never laid my claim and tried to go against Ryzen since I found all this business and politics quite bothersome. Of course, things cannot be that simple, especially in Demon World despite my wishes. So from time to time I have to deal with annoying would-be assassins sent by Ryzen's rivals who consider that my heritage could be a threat for their plans of conquest one day. They are nothing more than pests, too weak to pose any kind of threat against me. If I cared about ruling I could easily crush all the other would-be kings and their armies on my own and crown myself queen. She extended an arm, a sphere of demonic energy coalescing in her grasp before she closed her fist harshly, causing her knuckles to make loud cracking noises for emphasis, the energy gathered dissipating into nothing. But I really don't want to be the one in charge and have to deal with all the politics and issues attached with running a kingdom. I would prefer to travel and visit some other interesting places, to enjoy the sweetest pleasures of life. She said, giving a predatory grin to some of the male martial artists in the room, who just gulped in response. So in short, I know I'm not the right sort of person to be in charge of a kingdom, but all this constant and pathetic attempts against my life are starting to get on my nerves. That's why when Hild-sama told me about this assignment for her, I decided to take it without hesitation. Being here on Earth and accompany you all in your adventures will give me the chance to do what I always wanted, to go out and visit interesting places, not to mention allow me to get away from all the havoc currently in Makai. Pan thought about the explanation given to her for a moment before addressing the succubus. Well, I suppose I can understand your reasons for wanting to be here. HMMPH, just how much more powerful are you compared with the rest of the Mazoku? Hild took back to answering questions again. Morrigan is from a special breed of Mazoku, a higher more powerful one, way beyond than the rest of her race. A dark stalker, Belial was one, and he had the power to lay waste to entire solar systems with very little effort. So that should tell you how much more powerful is a dark stalker compared with a regular Mazoku. Pan accepted that explanation with a nod. Okay then, if that is all, then I guess our business here is concluded. I'll play host for Morrigan and make sure no harm comes to her, just make sure to fulfill your end of the bargain. She told to the Daimokaicho. Hild just replied with a nod. But of course, what kind of Daimokaicho would I be if I don't adhere to the terms of a contract? Do not worry, I may be many things, but if I give my word you can be sure I will stick up to it. One last thing though, Mara here has been having quite the rough time here on Earth. She said, motioning towards the blonde demoness flanking her other side. She just is unable to understand or get used to human customs, and that has caused her to have many unnecessary complications during her stay in here. I would consider it a personal favor if you could also keep an eye on her for me and make sure she doesn't get in trouble. The blonde demoness felt affronted at that suggestion from the Daimokaicho, as she saw it as an insult to her pride. I do not need to be babysitted like a child. I am a demoness first rank, the #1 agent under your command Daimokaicho, with the greatest amount of successful contracts ever achieved. She boasted proudly and arrogantly. Hild just looked at their subordinate with a plain stare. You live in the basement of an abandoned building. Hardly befitting for, as you say, a demoness of your rank. So yeah, you need someone to take care of you while you live here on Earth. The ruler of Hell stated with finality. Mara's mood deflated and she began to grumble under her breath. The Daimokaicho's stare softened for just a moment. Please Mara, this is for your own good. I do worry about you sometimes, and this would help to get my mind on ease and stop wondering if you've been sleeping in the cold at night or being eating properly. She said in an almost motherly affection. Mara seemed to grow embarrassed as she looked down with a blush on her face and pressed her index fingers together. I do been eating properly, she said in a contrite tone of voice. Mara, instant ramen is not a proper source of food. The Daimokaicho chastised in that tone that only a mother could pull off. Mara simply sputtered, unable to come up with a response. Could we not talk about this later? You're embarrassing me in front of the humans, Daimokaicho, she said, motioning with her arms towards the gathered fighters who were simply looking at them with blank looks. Pan interrupted their little bickering by clearing her throat. Cough smiley face, fine, whatever. If you want me to house another one of your minions, I'm sure I can find a place where to put her. It seems the only thing I'm good for on this planet is picking up strays. There was a shout of affront from the blonde demoness that sounded like, hey. Pan simply ignored it. But just so you know, you owe me for taking care of her also. since that is not part of our original deal, so I expect you to repay the favor when I come to collect it. She stated pointedly. Hild just shrugged. If that is your wish, as long as you keep giving me all these amusing situations to see, I don't mind giving you a hint or small assistances every now and then. Very well, if that is all, I have to get going. Being the Daimokaicho means I have a very tight schedule. But don't be a stranger and give me a call sometimes. The white-haired fake child said with a happy smile. Sure, could be useful to have the Daimokaicho in speed dial. Pan admitted while musing. The Daimokaicho then turned towards Erd's. Erd-chan, mommy's going now, so come here and say goodbye to her. She said with a happy wave. One of the eyebrows of the goddess of the past began to twitch. Just get lost already, Hild. Don't you have some souls to torture or something? She spat acidly. The ruler of hell was unaffected by her progeny's attitude. You still will not stop pretending that you don't love me. She shook her head. Seriously now, I expect you to call more regularly from now on. We barely have a chance to speak with each other, and it's rare when we are able to meet face to face. So try to keep in touch, okay? Erd narrowed her eyes at her mother with disdain. For a moment it seemed as if she was going to toss another insult at her, but then her mood deflated and she lowered her gaze to the floor. I'll try, but I can't promise anything. You know the rules. Hild just stared at her daughter seriously for a moment before letting out a tired sigh. Yes, I know. She then turned back towards Pan, her demeanor doing an 180 as she beamed a smile once more. Well, it has been fun, but I have to keep going, so I'll see you all later, ta-ta. She exclaimed with a hand gesture, before she began to sink into the floor through a portal that suddenly appeared until she was gone, the portal closing after her. A brief silence ensued in the room. So that's the Daimokaicho. She wasn't what I expected. Pan said, breaking the silence. So, I guess there's a story between you two, she said, trying not so subtly to inquire at the bronze-skinned goddess. I don't want to talk about it, okay? It's personal, Erd said in a depressed tone. Touchy subject, I gather. Very well, I will not pry in your bussiness. Pan then addressed the room in general. Is there something else that needs to be addressed, or are we finally done in here already? It was Koenma who spoke up. Nope, we're done. Everything it's settled. We all reached an agreement. War was averted. I think we can officially call it a day now. He approached Pan and gave her a card. Here, this is the number you can use to get in contact with us in the local soul office. For the moment though, I'll take my leave. There are still a lot of souls that need to be processed by the end of the day. I'll make sure to give you a call if a situation comes up that requires of your particular skill set, or to pass up any information that you might find interesting. The toddler said, signaling his assistant to start the preparations for their departure. The brunette girl nodded and went to a clear enough space in the room where to start using her magic to open another portal. Pan just nodded at the little boy. Okay, just remember, I need some time to get my things in order before I start taking missions from you. Koenma acknowledged her words. It's okay, there's nothing particular pressing right now. So you have all the time in the world to get your bearings. He then turned towards Botan, who had already finished opening a portal. Let's go, Botan, he said as he walked inside the twirling vortex. The brunette girl simply turned toward the gathered people with a smile and waved them goodbye happily. Bye, bye, were her words before she too entered inside the portal, the gateway between dimensions collapsing into itself once she was through. Pan let out a tired sigh and rubbed the back of her head, before turning towards Pirth and giving her a pointed stare. The brunette goddess knew exactly what she was expecting her to say. Yeah, I know. With the matter solved, I suppose should leave Lind and her angels alone. Well, I guess I must be going too then. Just remember to keep an eye on Lind and make sure she doesn't use her angels to try break her seal. She said, before going in search of a phone to use to transport herself back into heaven. Pan just acknowledged with another nod, glad that this long day was finally at an end, but wondering what the future will have in store now that she has representatives of the heavenly and demonic forces of this world following her around and has officially become the go-to person of the local soul office. Well, at least the last part makes her feel a little back at home, Those in charge of the afterlife had always given her elders the most interesting of missions to make for a nice break of the routine. At the very least, she can be certainly sure that her time in this planet will not be boring at all. Ch20.